Sandra Siegel was a struggling single mom when she met Mike Barajas.
He caught her eye, and one thing led to another. They ended up getting married.
Together, they built a comfortable life for Sandra's 2 daughters.
He raised them. He gave them everything that they needed.
Even if it meant letting them move back in as adults.
I don't think there was more than a year when they had the house to themselves.
They seemed to be happy, just like any typical American family.
But after almost 30 years together, Sandra and Mike's marriage would come to a tragic end.
All I can tell you is that we have an unknown deceased victim in the house.
Oh my God!
Was Mike the victim of a violent crime spree?
Colorado Springs was having a rash of home invasions and burglaries.
Or was it, as his brothers suspected, an inside job?
I said the only enemies he has is his stepdaughter and her friends.
But was that tension toxic enough to end in murder?
I don't have nothing to hide.
Or would the confession of an admitted criminal break the case wide open?
I told you I'd take his ass out.
He was worth more dead than he was alive.
And expose the one person no one suspected.
She was not a person of interest.
That was the love of your life at one time. It's just unimaginable.
Colorado Springs, Colorado, February 13th, 2013. It was the day before Valentine's Day in the city of 400,000 at the foot of the Rockies' spectacular Front Range.
It's a beautiful area. It's not utopia, but it's always been very pleasant and very calm and very quiet.
But at around 7 o'clock that Wednesday evening, Colorado Springs 911 received a worried call from one of the city's sprawling suburbs.
Our back door is open and the front room is all messed up.
The call came in as a burglary in progress.
The caller was 33-year-old Dawn Richburg.
Do you think that someone broke into your house? It does look like it.
Even more worrying, her stepfather, 47-year-old Miguel Mike Barajas, was supposed to be home.
I'm yelling, Daddy, and I'm not getting no response.
She says she saw a light on over by their mom and dad's bedroom. So she started walking towards there, and she stopped when she saw all of the bedding, sheets, everything pushed off onto the floor.
For all their sheets to be pulled off the bed like that, that's not normal.
She said she stopped, she got scared, and called us.
While sheriff's deputies converged on the scene, the dispatcher ordered Dawn out of the house for her own safety.
We're not sure if somebody's in the house or not.
And when the deputies arrived a few minutes later, they rushed into the house, guns drawn.
Anytime we're clearing a house, we have our weapons out.
What they found inside suggested a break-in.
There was stuff thrown all over the place and gone through.
But the ransacked rooms weren't all the officers found.
One of the first things they noticed was the spray painting in the house.
It looked to us like it was gang graffiti.
And when they looked inside the master bedroom, they found it exactly as Dawn described.
Blankets were all over the floor, and everything looked in disarray.
I yelled for Mr. Barajas, and I didn't receive a response. I took a closer look, and I saw a boot and a pant leg sticking out of the bedding.
It was Mike, and he was dead.
He was cold to the touch. He appeared to have been deceased for a while.
And when Sandra Barajas, Mike's wife of almost 30 years, rushed to the scene moments later, the news would send the 52-year-old widow collapsing into tears.
All I can tell you is that we have an unknown deceased victim in the house.
Oh my God! Mommy!
Born in 1960, Sandra Siegel spent her early years in El Paso, Texas, where she grew up to be a brash and outspoken teen.
She was very blunt, and she just said what came to her mind.
Her direct nature and occasionally bitter tongue didn't deter the boys, though. Sandra dated steadily through high school, got married soon after graduation, and gave birth to her daughter Dawn in 1979.
She was a happy-going girl. She liked to play.
A few years later, Sandra gave birth to a second daughter, but her marriage ended in divorce soon after.
He moved back with his family, and she kept the 2 girls.
And by her mid-20s, Sandra was still in El Paso, raising 2 children alone and barely making ends meet.
She had a job at a local, like a convenience store, gas station.
It was just a job to pay the bills, but it would end up changing the struggling single mom's life for the better, because that El Paso convenience store was where she met Mike Barajas. Born in 1965, Miguel Mike Barajas was the oldest of 4 brothers in a military family.
We traveled all over. We moved a lot. It seems like every 3 years. And that just kind of brought us all close together.
Being the oldest brother, he was left to babysit us a lot, so he never let us step out or, get out of control.
He was firm, but he was fair. He always watched out for us everywhere we went.
After graduating high school in 1983, he followed in his father's footsteps and joined the Army.
Once he graduated basic training, he was stationed down in Fort Bliss, Texas.
It was while living off base at Fort Bliss that he first met Sandra.
Every morning, he would stop at a gas station to fill up his car or to get a drink or something, and she worked there at the gas station, so that's kind of where they met.
I guess he caught her eye and she caught his, and they started talking and started going out, dating, and obviously one thing led to another.
And roughly a year after Sandra and Mike met, they were married.
We didn't make his actual wedding. All of us came down afterwards to visit him and meet her, and he was happy. I mean, he moved off post with her, and they got an apartment at first.
That wasn't the only big change for Mike either. At only 21, he was suddenly stepfather to Sandy's 2 girls, both under the age of 6.
He loved the girls loved him.
He raised them. He gave them everything that they needed.
And so that he could spend more time with his new family, Mike left the military in 1987 when his 4-year enlistment was up and took a 9-to-5 job as a security guard.
He was always the breadwinner. Sandy had odd jobs at different convenience stores and places like that.
It wasn't enough for luxuries, but over the next 10 years, Sandra and Mike built a life together.
He had a good life down there. He had everything he wanted. He had a wife, he had kids, he had good friends, he had, the only thing he was missing was Colorado and his family.
Because while Mike and Sandra were in El Paso, his brothers had all settled around Colorado Springs, where their father had spent many years while stationed at Fort Carson.
Mike would bring him up to the holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, every year.
We'd go down at least once every couple of years to visit Mike and Sandy and the kids, just to go down to visit them, go over to Mexico, do some shopping, eating some food.
But Mike had always longed to be reunited with his brothers. And in 1996, after more than a decade in El Paso, his brother Greg gave him the chance to do just that.
I got him a job where we worked at the car dealership. I told him, if you want the job, they want you here Monday.
Mike, who was used to sudden moves, didn't hesitate for a minute.
Mike came up, and he left the girls down there so they can pack up and get the house ready for sale. And then we all went down and got the girls and Sandy, and we moved them all up there. And when they came up, Mike was thrilled. Sandy wasn't so thrilled because she moved away from her mom and her sisters. And the girls, teenagers, they were mumbling and grumbling because they wanted to go back home, back to where they knew.
But after a few months, Sandra and the girls settled into life in Colorado Springs, which, thanks to the money Mike was making at his new job, was a step up from their old life in El Paso.
Mike was a very hard worker. He went to work every day like clockwork, came home every day like clockwork.
Everything seemed to be really good. They seemed to be happy, just like any typical American family.
Mike, happy to be reunited with his extended family, became very active in their church.
Mike was real involved. He was an usher, so he did Mass on Saturday night. Sunday mornings, they had breakfast after Mass down at the Knights of Columbus Hall. He would go down there and meet the guys, and, it was kind of his social hour. He would hang out, talk.
And while Sandra often went to Mass with her devout husband, She enjoyed more secular socializing.
Sandy would go up to Cripple Creek, which is a gambling community. You go up there, it's like a little miniature Las Vegas.
Their interests sometimes differed, but by 2013, after almost 30 years together, they still seemed devoted to one another.
They would spend the evenings out on the porch. They were good. They were a happy couple.
However, while Sandra's daughters were both grown by then, she and Mike weren't exactly empty nesters. 33-year-old Dawn, the oldest, was on the rebound, living at home after a series of failed relationships.
Dawn was in another state for a while, but they would come back and live for a while.
And Sandra's youngest daughter was living at home, too.
I don't think out of the 15 years we lived across the street that there was more than a year when they had the house to themselves.
Their mother and Mike were more than happy to help out, though.
He was very, very generous to the girls.
Everything was good. They seemed like they got along really well.
But the day before Valentine's Day, someone would break into the family's home and leave their happy life shattered. Coming up, evidence at the scene suggests a gang-related crime spree.
Colorado Springs was having a rash of home invasions and burglaries.
But investigators discovered there was some trouble at home.
Mike was saying that he was getting frustrated.
On the night of February 13, 2013, sheriff's deputies responding to a reported break-in found Sandra Barajas' husband, Mike, dead in their Colorado Springs, Colorado home.
He was shot more than one time with a handgun.
The shooting appeared to be the result of a burglary gone bad.
The window in the downstairs bathroom area appeared to have been broken from the outside in.
Those weren't the only things that suggested a robbery either.
Colorado Springs was having a rash of home invasions and burglaries.
And this time, the intruders may have left a calling card behind.
There was suspicious graffiti and markings within the residence.
The graffiti says something to the effect of, "You got jacked, fool," and WS13. 13 usually stands for a Hispanic gang.
Hoping for a little more information, the investigators turned to the person who'd placed the 911 call, Mike's stepdaughter, Dawn Richburg.
Dawn Richburg was the adult daughter of Sandra Barajas, who was living at the Barajas residence.
The 33-year-old told the investigator that she and her mother had taken her younger sister to the hospital earlier that day, and that she'd returned home just minutes before dialing 911.
Dawn was dropped off at the residence earlier in that evening by her mother. Once in there, she starts saying, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," calling for her father to let her know, or let him know she was home. She gets no answer, starts getting a feeling, she tells me, that something's not right. He usually always answers when we call his name. So she looks down the hallway to her parents' bedroom, and everything looked in disarray. That's when she gets nervous, calls 911, and backs out of the house until the police arrive.
Dawn's story matched the account she'd given the 911 operator and the evidence at the scene, but there was something troubling about it.
Her demeanor to me was very flat, non-emotional.
It struck me as very odd how flat she was.
Was Mike's stepdaughter, whom he'd raised since the age of 6, simply in shock? For the moment, all the investigators knew for certain was that when Dawn's mother, 52-year-old Sandra Barajas, rushed to the scene after receiving notification of her husband's death, she completely broke down.
How do I get in my house? We don't know, honey. We can't do anything until we start processing everything, okay?
Oh my God. Why?
She was highly emotional, and as far as outward appearances, she appeared what you expect somebody who had lost a loved one.
I want to say mine.
Okay, listen. I have to say mine.
We just had our 27th anniversary. You just don't understand.
I understand.
Unfortunately, she had little to offer the investigators in the way of leads.
Did he have any enemies?
Nobody. Mikey helped everybody.
But when Greg Barajas and his brother Chris rushed to the scene after receiving word of Mike's death, they did have something for the investigators. Chris told them he'd called Mike at around 6 o'clock that evening, barely an hour before Dawn dialed 911.
I called his house phone. He still had a house phone, and voice answered it.
A voice that wasn't Mike's.
I'm like, where's Mike at? And the guy that on the other end of the phone, he says, he must be in the shower. And I said, well, just tell him his brother Chris called.
Chris said he hadn't thought much of it at the time.
I didn't ask who he was because Dawn had guys hang around the house.
But the brothers said they'd become suspicious when they arrived at the scene and spotted a man they'd never seen before among the crowd of neighbors gawking from outside the police tape.
He just stuck out like a sore thumb, out there without a jacket.
It's February. It's probably low 30, 30 degrees. And he's got cargo shorts on and a t-shirt.
And then, moments before the brothers spoke to the investigators, the stranger had done something else that made them suspicious.
That guy walks up and asks, will you give me a ride? I go, give you a ride where? I said, who are you? And he goes, well, I'm the girl's friend.
Was he the same man Chris had spoken to on the phone? Neither of Mike's brothers knew for sure, but they thought the fact that the mystery man claimed to know Sandra's daughters could be significant.
Detective Otto, he started asking me, he goes, did he have any enemies? I said, the only enemies he has is his stepdaughter and her friends.
According to what his brothers told the investigator, the trouble between Mike and Dawn had started when she was in her teens.
She started having problems in school, and Dawn would get in trouble, and Mike would try to discipline her.
But it had little to no impact. After Dawn barely graduated, she left home and spent the next decade drifting from place to place and from one bad decision to the next.
She was always chasing after men, and she started doing drugs.
But a few months before her stepfather's murder, Dawn had ended up back home.
She was living with the guy up on the north side of Springs, and he died of a drug overdose.
The brothers said that Mike had been willing to take his stepdaughter in at first, but as the weeks and then months went by and she showed no intention of moving out, the old tensions resurfaced.
Mike was saying that he was getting frustrated, so I think it was starting to cause a lot of issues between the two of them.
And now, since a strange man who claimed to be Dawn's friend had been hanging around the crime scene, the investigators couldn't help but wonder, did the friction between Mike and his stepdaughter have something to do with his death?
I felt that something wasn't right here.
So that night, the investigators asked Dawn to come down to the sheriff's office for a formal statement, without indicating that they considered her a person of interest.
Dawn, I am sorry for your loss tonight. I know it's tough.
Dawn replied by claiming to have a good relationship with her stepfather.
We have good. We don't talk every single day, or I don't like hug him every single day, but we joke around a lot.
It was precisely the opening the investigators had been waiting for.
Be a little bit different story.
Put on the spot, Dawn insisted that her relationship with Mike had been good.
He even told me he'd help me buy me a car. So I didn't see no problems between us.
However, she did admit to having problems with drugs.
Have you ever been arrested before?
Yes.
Okay, for what?
Heroin.
But she insisted that she didn't know anything about her stepfather's murder.
I don't have nothing to hide. I didn't do nothing.
The investigators weren't sure they believed that.
Her demeanor led the detectives to the belief that there was more information that she knew.
But they had to let her go.
But it wasn't enough to be able to charge anybody.
However, they did give her a stern warning.
I really hope you think that if you were involved in this, that you would be wise enough to tell me your story before somebody else did. Because I can tell you this,
these cases, we will solve it. It's just a matter of time.
Coming up, the investigators track down the mystery man from the crime scene.
He was a top suspect in a series of unsolved break-ins.
But his arrest leads to a surprising twist.
Let me talk to your mom.
By Valentine's Day 2013, it had been less than 24 hours since Sandra Barajas' husband Mike was found murdered in the couple's Colorado Springs home.
There was a great level of fear because our neighborhood is a very quiet neighborhood. We have a lot of retirees. We've never really had any issues in our neighborhood. And then for that to happen, it's just quite a shock.
We just didn't know how that had happened or who had done it or anything. And it was a stark reality that it can happen anywhere.
But while the family's neighbors remained in the dark, the investigators were beginning to suspect that Sandra's daughter, 33-year-old Dawn Richburg, knew more about the crime than she was telling the police.
We've determined that Dawn had a substance abuse problem.
Right away, I suspected the daughter's friends robbed the house, and maybe it was a robbery gone bad. Mike walked in on them.
And then there was the mystery man Mike's brothers had spotted hanging around the house after the shooting. Was he the killer? The police couldn't rule out the possibility.
Investigators take intense interest in who this man might be.
And since the mystery man had been asking for a ride, the investigators took a long shot.
We contacted the local taxi cab company and tried to determine if there had been any pickups in the area on the night of the homicide.
The result was an incredible break.
There had been a request for a taxi cab to pick an individual up at a location that was basically just outside the police cordon around the residence.
And if that wasn't lucky enough, when the investigators tracked down the cell phone used to call the cab, they came up with a name: 34-year-old Tommy Wright.
Tommy was definitely an individual that was someone the police wanted to talk to.
And while investigators set out to find him, they brought in Sandra to see if Tommy had any connection to her husband.
Have you ever heard the name Tommy?
I heard the name.
Mentioned by your daughters?
I heard the name, but I don't know who he is.
Though Sandra said she thought Tommy had been to the Barajas house.
He's only come over to the house once, and that was in December.
Yeah, I mean, unless he's been there, when we weren't there, but I only remember him coming over like one time.
The info made Tommy the top suspect in Mike's murder, but it took almost a week until February 20th for the investigators to track down Tommy Wright.
We were contacted by the Springfield Police Department in the very southeast corner of the state of Colorado.
They'd just picked up Tommy for an unrelated crime.
Tommy Wright was arrested on car theft charges, aggravated motor vehicle theft charges.
As soon as they got word that he was in custody, the Colorado Springs detectives made the 3-hour drive to Springfield. But they didn't find Tommy in a cooperative mood.
He didn't want to talk to us when he was arrested in Springfield.
Would they even need him to talk, though? After their trip to Springfield, the investigators returned to Colorado Springs and got a warrant to search Tommy's car and the apartment where he'd been staying.
Sergeant Otto, during his search of the vehicle and the apartment, recovered a .45 caliber handgun.
The gun was sent to the crime lab to determine if it was the murder weapon.
They compare the bullets that were recovered from Mike's body to the firearm.
But if the bullets matched, would it be case closed? Or would a shocking new development take the investigation in a surprising direction? By May 17, 2013, it had been 3 months since her husband's murder, and Sandra Barajas and her daughters were struggling to move on without Mike.
She said that they were hoping to move to another state where there was some family and some support, and that they were just hoping to start over.
And it seemed that Sandra might soon have some official closure, too, once the ballistics came back on the gun found in Tommy Wright's car.
We did have the murder weapon.
And on May 17th, during the grand jury hearing to formally indict Tommy Wright for Mike's murder, the authorities received an unexpected break.
sitting next to DA Reggie Short, getting a text message from one of my cohorts saying that Tommy Wright is willing to tell everything.
Hoping for a confession, the prosecutors arranged to put the grand jury hearing on hold while the investigators once again sat down with Tommy.
He completely acknowledged that he had been the one who fired the fatal shot.
He took 2 steps forward to the bed. That's when I stood up and shot him.
But just when the investigators figured they had everything they needed to convict Tommy of murder, his confession took an unexpected turn.
Tommy reveals that this wasn't a break-in after all. It was a murder plot.
And the real shock was who Tommy claimed was behind it.
He had done it in concert with, or specifically at the request of Sandra Barajas.
Tommy's claim caught the investigators completely by surprise.
Quite frankly, Sandra Barajas was not a person of interest, and over the course of several opportunities to speak with her, she certainly appeared to be distraught over the loss of her husband.
But according to Tommy, it was all an act. Tommy told the investigators that he'd met Sandra through her daughters.
Tommy told me that he met Dawn and her sister at a local convenience store in Colorado Springs. They met, started talking, some flirting. He goes with Dawn, her sister, to the residence. He spends some time there. They party, do drugs, things like that.
And according to Tommy, once Dawn brought him home, Sandy had approached him with an offer.
Sandy tells Tommy Wright she wants her husband dead.
They're supposed to give me the truck. They offer me $5,000 in cash.
However, according to Tommy, it wasn't just the $5,000 Sandy offered that sealed the deal. It was something else.
Sandra had told Tommy that Mike had been behaving inappropriately with Dawn's sister in a sexual manner.
This infuriated Tommy, and he felt he was going to step up and do the right thing if he would kill Mike Barajas.
Tommy told me that they talked about the plan to kill Mike, and they agreed. They came up with a plan, down to details.
They're going to stage a burglary. They're going to use spray paint to write messages on the wall and suggest that it's gang members who broke into the house.
Tommy said that once the plans were set, Sandra and Dawn took Dawn's sister to the hospital so that Sandra would have an alibi.
They left the residence, leaving Tommy Wright behind.
I started painting right as they were leaving.
And then, after taking the .45 from Mike's gun cabinet, Tommy had laid an ambush.
He describes positioning himself inside the bedroom with the lights turned off.
And at around 6 o'clock, Mike came into the house.
He described the moment that Mike walked into his bedroom. Tommy said he was crouched at Mike's bed, holding a .45 caliber pistol.
After Mikkel is dead, what all do you do? I just look at the showcase.
But then, while waiting for Sandra to pick him up when she dropped off Dawn to find her stepfather's body, the plan had gone awry.
The phone rang, and he answered the phone thinking it was them, and it was actually Chris.
That phone call screwed my whole day up.
Because according to Tommy, after he'd hung up on Mike's brother, he panicked and fled the house.
He hides in a drainage ditch, and at some point, he doubles back and returns to the house. He asks several people for a ride, and when he can't get one, he uses a cell phone to call a cab company.
The things that Tommy was telling me fit and were consistent with what we had found.
But would it be enough to pin the murder on Sandra and her daughter?
I proposed to Tommy that he place a phone call to Sandra to talk about what happened with Mike.
Minutes later, with the detectives listening in, Tommy made the call, but it was Sandra's daughter who answered.
Hey, Don.
Yeah.
What's up? It's Tommy.
Oh, what's up?
It's clear from the first words of that phone call that Dawn is A, not thrilled to hear from Tommy, and B, very concerned that this person would be reaching out to her.
But Tommy pushed on, regardless.
Let me talk to your mom, because she kind of owes me big time. You guys all owe me big time.
Dawn didn't deny it. And when she put her mother on the phone, Tommy quickly got her to admit even more.
I told you I'd take his ass out, and I did I not? And if I'm saying that would be stupid of me to say if somebody listened.
I do have to give Tommy credit. He was very savvy on the phone.
I kept my word, and I killed Mike for you. Did I not? Yeah. Okay, so here's what I need from you.
He needs his money.
Money that, as it turned out, Sandra didn't have.
How much money will you be able to give me?
I give you $500.
It was only a tenth of what he'd been promised, but the fact that Sandra agreed to pay Tommy anything was enough for the investigators.
Sandra agrees to meet Tommy at the Walmart location on the north end of town, where we have, obviously, units waiting for her.
As soon as she got into the area, she was stopped, contacted, and subsequently arrested.
And soon after Sandra's arrest, deputies went to her house and took her daughter Dawn into custody too.
When we heard about the arrest, we were surprised, but in some ways it was a relief to know that it wasn't some random attack.
Coming up, the trial reveals a possible motive.
You go up there and you can lose all your money in hours.
But is the prosecution's star witness worth the gamble?
We felt we had to make a deal with the devil.
On February 4th, 2014, Sandra Barajas went on trial for murder in the El Paso County Courthouse in Colorado Springs. The 53-year-old was accused of orchestrating the murder of her husband, Mike, who died in February of 2013, the victim of what initially appeared to be a home invasion robbery.
There was quite a bit of evidence that supported that idea.
But when the investigators caught up with Mike's killer, a petty thief named Tommy Wright, he told them that the so-called home invasion was just a cover for a murder plot cooked up by Sandra and her daughter, 34-year-old Dawn Richburg.
Tommy, Dawn, and Sandra were all arrested for Mike's murder.
But why would Sandra and her daughter want Mike dead? It certainly wasn't the reason they gave Tommy when they recruited him as Mike's killer.
We never found one piece of evidence, one statement that substantiated the claim that Mike had sexually abused Dawn's sister.
Instead, in his opening statement, the prosecutor claimed that Sandra's motive was far simpler.
She had a gambling problem.
According to the prosecutors and Mike's brothers, Sandra's gambling trips to Cripple Creek had crippled the family's finances.
You go up there and you can lose all your money in hours.
That was a family in severe financial distress, and it appeared to be a condition that was getting worse at every opportunity. The family was having difficulty making their bills.
He was starting to have problems with making the mortgage payment every month. But he was telling us my house is in foreclosure.
And the prosecutors theorized that by the beginning of 2013, things had gotten so bad that Mike finally decided to do something about it.
I believe he finally told her that he wanted a divorce.
And since Sandra didn't have a full-time job, the prosecution argued that Mike's decision had created a new crisis for Sandra and Dawn.
Sandy doesn't work. You could count on one hand how many times she's ever had a job in the whole time they were married. They couldn't survive without Mike.
At least not if he divorced Sandra. But if Mike died?
They knew Mike had life insurance.
It wasn't really a whole lot. I think all said and done, it was $150,000.
But according to the prosecution, that $150,000 was more than enough.
Anytime that you've got family and financial distress, that's always a motivation.
Sandra wanted to pay off the bills, to pay off the house, to pay off whatever bill she had, and then have money extra.
And that wasn't the only way that Sandra could cash in on her husband's death either.
They had an accidental death that they had through his work and then his retirement.
He was worth more to them dead than he was alive.
They figured they could live the rest of their life off of what they got off of him.
According to the prosecution, it was easy to convince Sandra's drug-addicted daughter to go along with the plan.
This was a murder plot that was hashed out while Don and Tommy Wright were using methamphetamine.
And they claimed that Sandra's offer of $5,000 just as easily convinced Tommy to be the trigger man.
Paying someone to kill someone that you married and was the love of your life at one time is just unimaginable.
It might have seemed unimaginable to most people, but the prosecutors had a powerful witness prepared to testify that it was true.
The district attorney's office had come to an agreement with Tommy Wright.
It was either nail him to the wall, because they definitely have the evidence, and send him to prison for life and let Sandy possibly walk, or make a deal with him and get Sandy.
We felt we had to make a deal with the devil.
And when he took the stand, Tommy did his best to look the part.
Tommy was entirely nonchalant about the description of killing somebody.
He had like a smirk on his face, like he enjoyed it.
And as he testified, the entire courtroom hung on his every word.
It was absolutely riveting to hear.
Or infuriating, depending on one's perspective.
I wanted to get up there and go beat him to a pulp is what I wanted to do.
Tommy had such an arrogance about himself.
In fact, Tommy's arrogance was so off-putting that the prosecutors worried that his testimony could backfire.
We were concerned it wouldn't be enough to get a first-degree murder conviction.
Luckily, they had the tapes to back up Tommy's story.
I kept my word and I killed Mike for you, did I not?
We felt it was beyond a reasonable doubt that she should be convicted of first-degree murder.
However, despite the phone calls and the fact that she'd been arrested while trying to pay her husband's killer, the defense argued that Sandra was innocent.
She has steadfastly maintained that she was not responsible for Tommy Wright killing her husband.
She was somewhat in disbelief, almost like we were making these things up.
However, there were at least some parts of Tommy's testimony that the defense agreed with.
The suggestion from Sandra Barajas is that it was Tommy Wright and Dawn Richburg who were responsible for the murder.
And according to the defense, Sandra wasn't involved at all. It was her daughter, Dawn, who'd recruited Tommy alone.
Sandy and her defense team basically turned the whole thing over against Dawn.
She had a problem with drugs, would do anything to get them, saw her stepfather, Mike, as someone who was in the way of her getting what she wanted.
And according to the defense, she didn't hesitate to get rid of her stepfather, the man that had raised her from the time she was 6 years old.
They described her as a con artist, backstabber, very mean, hateful person. She would do anything to get to what she needs.
She was very manipulative. She was a liar. My belief is she is a cold-blooded person, too, and very, very capable of murder.
But if that were true, why was Sandra the one who'd been arrested paying for the hit? According to the defense, it was only because Dawn had pressured her mother into it.
They said Dawn was so manipulative, Dawn was so demanding, Dawn so mean, I'm terrified for my life. It's all we heard for a week and a half was Dawn, Dawn, Dawn.
Coming up, will the jurors believe a confessed killer?
Tommy would not be credible.
Or will they side with Sandra?
The longer it goes, typically it doesn't go in the prosecution's favor.
On Friday, February 21st, 2014, The jury announced a verdict in the murder trial of Sandra Barajas. The 53-year-old mother of two was charged with orchestrating the murder of her husband, Mike.
She's the one who, lack of a better word, was the brains of the operation. She was in it up to her eyeballs.
This was Sandra actively participating, actively seeking out someone to carry this out.
And the man who'd carried it out, 35-year-old Tommy Wright, had been the star witness for the prosecution.
Tommy testified, and it was tough. I mean, because you had to sit there, listen to all the gruesome details.
But would those gruesome details be enough for a conviction? Or would his conduct on the witness stand sway the jury in Sandra's favor?
He, at various points, seemed to break out into either a smirk or some sort of laughter.
She thought that she would get off, that she would be found not guilty, that Tommy would not be credible.
And when the jury finally filed back into the courtroom, Sandra may have had reason to feel confident.
The deliberation went 2.5 days, which started to worry me because I've always heard the longer the jury deliberates, typically it doesn't go in the prosecution's favor.
But would that be true this time?
Sandra was found guilty of first-degree murder.
She was very, very surprised when she was convicted. That shocked her.
Mike's brothers were just as overcome.
They were all very happy, broke down, started crying.
She was going to jail for life.
In Colorado, the sentence for first-degree murder is life without parole.
Sandra's conviction was enough to convince her daughter, Dawn Richburg, to cut a deal. The 34-year-old had also been charged with her stepfather's murder.
Dawn pled to second-degree murder.
She had just seen her mother be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. I think that anybody would have to think twice about whether they wanted to go through that same process with that same potential outcome.
Since the trial, Mike's younger brothers still struggle to deal with their loss.
I lay awake at night thinking my brother died senselessly.
He was a good father, husband, just all the way around a good man.
But they take comfort in knowing that Sandra will ultimately pay the price for what she's done.
It's a peaceful thought to think she's going to take her last breath behind those walls.
The desert has a way of holding secrets. Its vast, silent expanses can swallow events whole, leaving only the sun-baked ground and the whispering winds to bear witness. But sometimes, even the desert is compelled to yield its truths, no matter how grim or how deeply buried. Such was the case with the disappearance and subsequent discovery of Paul Thompson, a story that would unravel the illusion of a perfect, all-American family and expose the chilling machinations of a soul bereft of empathy. As a criminal psychology analyst, and one who endeavors to capture the human condition in narrative, the unfolding of this particular drama offers a profound, albeit somber, lesson in the deceptive facades people construct. The year was 2001, and America was still reeling from the shock of a national tragedy. Yet, in the quiet, suburban community of Avondale, Arizona, a city nestled on the western periphery of Phoenix, another, more personal tragedy was about to begin its slow, agonizing reveal. On a Wednesday morning, specifically October 24th, Karen Thompson, then 37 years of age, placed a worried call to the local police department. Her husband, Paul Thompson, a man of 31 years, had not returned home from work the previous night. Karen, by all accounts, appeared frantic. Her voice, laced with a tremor of fear, conveyed a desperate concern to the dispatcher. She articulated the common refrain of a spouse suddenly confronted with an inexplicable absence. He's not the type to just go. This initial statement, seemingly innocuous, would later be scrutinized for its subtle undercurrents. For the narrative Karen was beginning to construct, a narrative designed to shape perceptions and deflect suspicion. The morning hours leading up to that phone call to the authorities had been consumed by a flurry of increasingly worried outreach. Karen had reached out to a multitude of friends and family members, each conversation a reiteration of the same unsettling news. Paul was missing. The replies she received echoed her own bewilderment. One relative recalled her words, "He just didn't come home." The sheer simplicity of that statement, juxtaposed against the profound anxiety it evoked, was deeply unsettling. "That just really shook me," the relative later recounted. A sentiment that resonated with everyone in Paul's orbit. No one in their extended network of relations, from sisters and brothers to close friends, had any inkling of Paul's whereabouts. Calls were made, prayers were offered. A collective sense of unease settled upon their collective hearts. By mid-morning, with no answers forthcoming, the police were finally engaged. Karen, described by one officer as pretty upset, declared her ignorance. "We don't know why he's missing, or where he's missing." The stage was set for a mystery that would soon morph into something far more sinister. A chance discovery on a remote desert roadside, miles from the Thompsons' suburban home, would soon inject a stark, almost theatrical, element into the unfolding enigma. A vehicle, abandoned under peculiar circumstances, presented a new, perplexing layer to the case. It looked like he walked out from that truck and simply vanished from the face of the earth. A law enforcement official would later observe, a statement that perfectly captured the initial, baffling nature of Paul Thompson's disappearance. The initial picture painted was one of an unexplained vanishing act, a man dissolving into the vast, indifferent landscape. Yet, as with all carefully constructed illusions, the facade of this perfect, all-American family was about to crumble, revealing the darker truths that lay beneath. To understand the unraveling of the Thompson family, one must first understand its foundational elements, particularly the woman at its perceived center. Karen, born in the year 1964. Karen's early life began far removed from the sun-drenched, arid expanses of the Southwest. Her roots were firmly planted in the rich, fertile soil of Kankakee, Illinois, a small, rural town south of the bustling metropolis of Chicago. Here, life revolved around the rhythm of the land. Most everybody around there farmed, a family member recalled, painting a picture of a community deeply connected to agrarian traditions. "It's rural, and we always had country things to do." For Karen, the youngest of 6 children, this meant a childhood imbued with a love for the outdoors and a particular affinity for animals. She was, by all accounts, a natural equestrian, capable of riding horses almost as soon as she was able to walk. She loved horses, her sister reminisced. She loved being outside and taking care of animals and stuff. This earthy connection, however, was balanced by an equally strong social dynamism. Despite being the youngest, Karen was never one to fade into the background. She was always very outgoing, another family member noted. She made friends easy. "She's pretty outspoken. She'll let you know what she thinks." This blend of rural charm and innate assertiveness made her a memorable figure in her hometown. Beyond her vibrant personality, Karen also possessed a sharp intellect. She was always really smart, her sister proudly declared, and she was really good in math. Such academic prowess, combined with her love for animals, led many in her family to harbor specific aspirations for her future. A lot of the people in her family thought that she would end up going into veterinarian school and working with horses. The path seemed clear, charted by talent and passion. Yet, as is often the case in the complex tapestry of human life, an unforeseen thread began to weave itself into Karen's destiny, diverting her from the expected trajectory. This thread, a recurring motif in her life, was her unfortunate attraction to a particular type of individual. Karen went for bad boys, a poignant observation revealed. She was attracted to the type of guys who did not treat her well. This pattern, a siren song to tumultuous relationships, pulled her away from the academic path. Instead of pursuing higher education, Karen, upon graduating high school in 1982, sought to put geographical distance between herself and a particularly painful breakup. She relocated to Oklahoma, drawn by the prospect of new employment opportunities and the presence of other sisters who had also moved there. There were jobs out there and some other sisters had moved out there, so she went out there too. Her sister explained, detailing a common migratory pattern for young adults seeking a fresh start. In Oklahoma, Karen embarked upon her first marriage, a union that brought her 2 daughters. However, after 6 years, the marriage dissolved into divorce. The details of this separation remained somewhat vague, even to those closest to her. I don't know a lot about why they separated. I was way too young to even know. One of her daughters later confessed, highlighting the emotional distance and protective barriers often erected around such adult upheavals. Soon after, a geographical shift once more marked a new chapter in Karen's life. She moved to Texas to be closer to her brother and entered into a second marriage. This union, however, proved equally ephemeral. Her second husband, a member of the armed services, was frequently absent due to deployments. He was in the service, so he was gone quite a little bit, a family member recounted. Upon his discharge, the strains on the relationship became insurmountable. And when he got out of the service, it didn't work out real well. By 1992, after less than 3 years of marriage, Karen once again found herself navigating the turbulent waters of separation and eventual divorce, now with 3 children to raise. It was during this period of transition, working in the floral department of an Arkansas grocery store, that the then 27-year-old Karen encountered Bob Mahala. Bob, a newcomer to the area, had a casual inquiry about horseback riding that led him to Karen. One of the girls at the register, he recalled. I asked about horseback riding. She said her girlfriend in the floral department had 2 horses. So, I go to the floral department and I meet Karen. A seemingly innocent introduction quickly blossomed into something more. Newly single, Karen accepted Bob's invitation to go riding. Their shared passion for horses, a thread from Karen's childhood, provided an immediate connection. I just felt for her, Bob admitted. She was a very pretty lady and very fun. After several rides, their relationship deepened, and they began dating. The relationship progressed rapidly, culminating in Karen becoming pregnant. Karen, still legally married to her second husband, promptly divorced him and, in the fall of 1992, married Bob. However, the optimism of this new beginning was short-lived. Almost as soon as Karen and her 2 daughters moved in with their new stepfather, fissures began to appear. Bob, suddenly confronted with the realities of instant fatherhood, felt overwhelmed. I wasn't ready to be a dad, he confessed. The weight of his unpreparedness palpable even years later. When here I am a dad. Now I've got a family. These little girls look up to me. They're calling me Dad. Daddy Bob. The endearing term, Daddy Bob, belied the internal struggle he faced. This domestic arrangement, burdened by Bob's reluctance to fully embrace his new role, crumbled in less than a year, not long after the birth of their son. I went down the street and got my own apartment, and I filed for divorce, Bob recounted. A stark testament to the speed with which his commitment evaporated. Once again, Karen found herself a single mother, now with 3 children dependent on her. Yet, despite the emotional and financial strain, she remained resolute in her commitment to her children. She was very good at making sure we had everything we needed, her daughter attested. She always tried her best to do special things for each of us to feel important. The children, shielded from the full brunt of their mother's struggles, perceived a woman doing her best. So when she was struggling, we didn't know. Having quit her florist job during her pregnancy, Karen sought employment to support her burgeoning family. She found temporary work at the local airport, a job that involved the arduous task of loading bags onto the plane. This physically demanding temporary role, however, proved to be an unexpected catalyst, sparking a new professional ambition. Working at the airport for Karen, it opened her world up, a family member observed, recognizing the transformative power of new experiences. The 29-year-old Karen decided to pursue a career as a travel agent, a path that would not only offer a new professional direction, but also lead her to the man she hoped would finally provide the stability she craved, Paul Thompson. Paul Thompson, 6 years Karen's junior, shared a similar small-town Midwestern upbringing. He was born in Blue Earth, Minnesota, and spent the first 13.5 years of his life in northern Iowa. However, in stark contrast to Karen's outgoing nature, Paul was an introverted, quiet child. So that's why I remember he didn't have as many friends in school growing up. His brother reflected. And yeah, I remember the majority of his time was spent in his room reading. This solitary inclination, rather than being a hindrance, served Paul well academically. In school, he was a straight-A student. He pretty much sucked everything in. Despite his academic aptitude, financial constraints precluded a direct path to college. Instead, Paul opted for military service, joining the Army. His time in the service took him across continents, with 2 years spent in England and another 2 in Germany. Inspired by his overseas experiences, upon his discharge, Paul pursued classes to become a travel agent, a decision that would providentially lead him to Karen. Their initial encounter, as Karen herself described it, held an almost cinematic quality. She told me one time that he was sitting at the table, and this was when they were in travel agency school, a relative recounted. She said, looking over at him, I just figured, well, he looks like such a nice, quiet guy just sitting there, and I should go over and meet him. For the reserved loner that Paul was. This direct approach from an attractive woman was a novel experience. He was taken aback a bit that a woman who he saw was attractive was engaging him. His brother mused, it was something very different than he had ever dealt with before. Yet Paul, perhaps subconsciously yearning for connection, certainly appreciated the attention. He really did fall hard for her. The classic adage, opposites attract, seemed to manifest in their burgeoning relationship. Opposites attract, and that's probably what attracted him to her, a friend surmised. Not long after her third divorce was finalized, Karen and her 3 children moved in with Paul. The speed of this cohabitation raised eyebrows, particularly that of her ex-husband, Bob. I was mad. I said, wow, that's quick. We're just divorced. And you're already in with this other guy a month later. Yet, Paul's inherent easygoing nature eventually won over even a skeptical Bob. He was very good with the children, and the children liked Paul. Paul, it seemed, genuinely embraced his new role. Paul really thought the world of her kids, a friend confirmed. For Karen, Paul represented a potential end to her string of failed relationships. A beacon of stability. He represented someone who maybe could provide that stability that she had sought out her entire life. For the next 3 years, Karen, Paul, and the children made their home in Missouri. However, in 1997, an opportunity arose that would lead them west. Paul's brother, working for a telephone company, informed him of a job opening in Arizona. The prospect of stable employment and good income was particularly appealing to Paul, who was the primary financial support for Karen and her children. His brother worked for a telephone company, which sounded pretty good to Paul because he was supporting her and the kids. Upon their arrival in Arizona, they settled in Avondale, a tranquil suburban community located approximately 30 minutes west of the bustling cityscape of Phoenix. After more than 3 years of cohabitation, Karen and Paul finally formalized their union. He'd wanted to marry her pretty bad, a family member shared, underscoring Paul's commitment. The wedding took place in August of 1998 at a Phoenix hotel. The arid Arizona summer ensured a memorable event, with temperatures soaring to a scorching 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet no one seemed to mind the heat of an outdoor courtyard wedding. It was really very much a storybook wedding, a guest recalled, and a very happy day. Everyone present saw an optimistic future for this newly formed family. Paul was thriving in the telecommunications field, earning a commendable income, and Karen had found her dream job as a travel agent. She'd booked several different things for me over the years, a client remembered, describing Karen as a very flirtatious, fun-type person. You know, so she was always trying to be the best deal that she could. By the autumn of 2001, the bright future envisioned at their wedding seemed to have fully materialized. The Thompson family had seamlessly integrated into the fabric of suburban American life. They became a very traditional type of family, a friend observed. The type of family that went to PTA meetings. The type of family that went to after-school activities. The outward appearance was one of idyllic harmony. It was the perfect, happy, all-American family. But as any seasoned observer of human nature knows, perfection is often a fragile construct, a meticulously crafted illusion designed to conceal the cracks beneath. Was this family, seemingly so robust and contented, truly too good to last? The answer would come chillingly swiftly, just months after their third wedding anniversary, when Paul Thompson would, indeed, suddenly disappear. The stage had been set, the characters introduced, and the curtain was about to rise on a dark and disturbing act. The immediate aftermath of Paul's disappearance was marked by a chilling discovery that only deepened the mystery. It was a little after midnight on October 24th, in the desolate desert expanse north of Phoenix, when a passing motorist first noticed a strange anomaly. A truck, incongruously parked on the side of a remote road, its headlights piercing the inky blackness, its engine purring softly, yet eerily devoid of a driver. The motorist, initially focused on taking his girlfriend home after a date, didn't immediately stop. But the image of the abandoned vehicle gnawed at him. After dropping off his girlfriend, a sense of unease compelled him to circle back. 45 minutes had elapsed, yet the truck remained precisely where he had last seen it. A ghost in the night, still running, still illuminated. Concerned that the driver might be in distress, perhaps suffering a medical emergency in the unforgiving desert, the passerby decided to investigate. He approached the truck cautiously, peering into its empty cabin, scanning the surrounding darkness. There was no one. The vehicle appeared to have been simply abandoned, its keys still in the ignition, its engine still running, as if its driver had been spirited away in an instant. It was just as if he had been locked away. A later description captured the inexplicable nature of the scene. Puzzled and deeply unsettled, the passerby contacted emergency services. When deputies from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office arrived, they were met with the same profound bewilderment. The scene offered no immediate answers, no obvious signs of struggle or foul play. "There's no blood. There's no weapons. There's no signs of foul play," one deputy reported. It didn't appear to be a carjacking. Valuable tools were still present in the truck, untouched. The only tangible clues came from running the truck's license plate. The vehicle belonged to Paul Thompson, a 31-year-old man residing nearly an hour away in Avondale, Arizona. The deputies contacted Paul's wife, Karen Thompson, then 37. Her initial reaction, once informed of the truck's discovery, was described as one of increased worry and upset. The location of the abandonment, in such a bizarre area, offered no logical explanation for Paul's presence there. The remoteness of the site, far removed from his usual routes, was profoundly unsettling. Yet, despite the strangeness of the situation, the absence of any concrete evidence of foul play meant that, for the moment, Paul remained merely a missing person. The authorities, with no clear indication of a crime, returned the truck to Karen and the family. This decision, seemingly routine at the time, would later prove to be a critical misstep, effectively contaminating what might have been a vital crime scene. With the truck recovered, Paul's family embarked on a desperate search. His brother, Pete, and Pete's wife spent an entire day diligently scouring the desert near where the truck had been found, hoping against hope to discover Paul, perhaps disoriented or injured. See if Paul was out there wandering around," Pete later recounted, the raw hope in his voice still evident years later. "I just remember combing the desert for hours, looking for any sign of him, any evidence, hoping for something that would lead us in a direction to find him." Karen and her daughters also joined the frantic efforts, distributing flyers, talking to residents in nearby areas. "They made flyers and stuff and put it up, and we were trying to work together," her daughter recalled. "We walked forever, walking to see, and if we can see them somewhere, passing out flyers at the houses." But after nearly 24 hours of exhaustive, emotionally draining searching, Paul remained elusive. They were running into a dead end. The desert, however, was not yet finished revealing its secrets. The search for answers would soon lead investigators to another remote patch of arid land, this time to a different, far more gruesome, sort of dead end. It was the morning of October 25th, the day after Karen Thompson had officially reported Paul missing, when a group of ATV riders ventured into the rugged terrain of the White Tank Mountains. This sprawling 30,000-acre park, located approximately 30 minutes north of Avondale and nearly an hour west of where Paul's truck had been found, was a popular recreational area. The landscape was a harsh beauty, really rocky desert was cactus. And you've got to be careful when you go in there, a local described it. But on this particular morning, one rider encountered an obstacle far more disturbing than a rocky outcrop or a thorny cactus. He didn't realize it until he rolled over it that there was a body there. The discovery was horrifying. A male body mutilated, bearing the marks of extreme violence. They discovered a male that had been mutilated, shot, beat up, possibly stabbed. A news report would later summarize the initial findings. The initial assessment was stark. It appears that he has been murdered. The ATV riders, shaken to their core, immediately contacted the authorities. By the time the Buckeye police arrived, the crime scene offered little in the way of pristine evidence. The very nature of the discovery, in a heavily trafficked recreational area, meant that potential physical evidence had been largely compromised. Detective Dave Owens, he had been out of the scene, and he came back and I said, "What have we got out there?" A colleague recounted. Owens's weary, grim reply spoke volumes, and he said, "I've got a mess." ATV tracks crisscrossed the area. Countless footprints obscured what might have been valuable impressions. The body itself had no wallet, no identification. He was, for all intents and purposes, a John Doe. The immediate path forward for identification was clear, yet painstaking. So it really boils down to having to go to the medical examiner's office, collect the fingerprints, and try to run through a system, and that's going to take time. The autopsy, however, offered a chilling testament to the brutality of the victim's final moments. The medical examiner's report painted a graphic picture of sustained, horrific violence. There were 61 separate blows to the head, one investigator later revealed. The sheer number staggering. Blunt force trauma had fractured his skull. But these horrific injuries were only the beginning of the assault. They found stab wounds, they found 3 separate gunshot wounds, one to his back. The culmination of these brutal injuries spoke volumes about the killer's intent, conveying a depth of rage that transcended mere homicide, which told the investigators at least one thing about the victim and his killer. An officer reflected, somebody really hated that guy. The question, now rendered infinitely more urgent, echoed through the sterile corridors of the police station. Who was he, though? While the dead man's fingerprints were not immediately present in existing databases, a crucial, albeit subtle, clue had been left behind. The victim wore a wedding ring, a distinctive piece of jewelry with 3 diamonds that were in a diagonal pattern. In hopes of identifying this unique item, investigators initiated a search of recent missing persons reports, recognizing this as the most likely avenue to connect the John Doe with a living identity. That's where you're going to be able to possibly pull something up, they reasoned. Their diligence soon yielded a potential match. The description of the body, and more importantly, the wedding ring, seemed to align with a missing person reported just days prior, Paul Thompson. By that very evening, the Buckeye detective, carrying the weight of this grim suspicion, was knocking on Karen Thompson's door. They were very anxious to talk to the person who reported him missing. Karen, in her interaction with the detective, appeared more than willing to talk to him. She maintained her initial narrative that Paul's disappearance was out of character, that something went wrong, and that he was in danger. The police, now with the knowledge of the desert body, knew she was tragically correct, though they chose not to reveal the full extent of their discovery. They didn't tell her that they had found Paul's body, a deliberate choice to gauge her reactions. All they disclosed was that they had spoken with someone who had information. The detective, however, did press Karen about any jewelry Paul might have been wearing. Her description of his wedding ring was precise, detailing the very unique design on that wedding ring, confirming the 3 diamonds that were in a diagonal pattern. It was at this moment, with Karen's unwitting confirmation, that investigators were able to definitively conclude that the body discovered in the desert, marred by ATV tracks and shrouded in dirt, was indeed the missing Paul Thompson. But when the detective finally shared this devastating suspicion with Karen, a strange and unsettling phenomenon occurred. Her reaction was very weirdly unemotional. This detachment, a stark contrast to her earlier frantic demeanor, immediately raised an alarm. Everyone grieves differently, a detective acknowledged, adhering to the basic tenets of human psychology. But it was an alarm bell for police that Karen seemed so unemotional and detached. Further adding to the investigators' burgeoning suspicions, Karen became distinctly defensive when the detective began to probe into the dynamics of her marriage with Paul. Karen says, "I know what you're trying to go for, but there weren't any problems in our marriage. We weren't having affairs." She vehemently denied any marital discord, asserting her absolute certainty of Paul's faithfulness. In a particularly jarring turn of phrase, she dismissed any notion of Paul having an affair, stating, in her words, "He's so boring. He would never have the energy or the drive to cheat." This statement, uttered in the face of her husband's suspected death, was deeply unsettling. "Her husband's dead and she's picking him apart," an investigator observed. The psychological dissonance profoundly jarring for the police. However, when the inquiry shifted to her own fidelity, Karen's narrative underwent a swift and convenient adjustment. Despite her previous insistence on marital perfection, she claimed that, despite the quirks in the relationship, Karen professed to police that they had a very active and very enjoyable sex life. This sudden pivot, a thinly veiled attempt to assert normalcy in the face of probing questions, further fueled the detectives' unease. Karen's overall attitude, a blend of defensiveness and a peculiar lack of genuine grief for her deceased husband, was deeply suspicious. And it wasn't the only thing that caught the detectives' astute attention. When asked to account for her whereabouts on the night Paul went missing, Karen stated she had been with a friend named Steve. She adamantly insisted that Steve was just a friend, a platonic confidant. Karen explained to police that they were just socializing, that he was going through a divorce, and that she was just trying to be there for him as a friend. She asserted that Paul was fully aware of this arrangement, painting a picture of an open, mutually respectful relationship. Karen went further, explaining that Tuesdays in their relationship were set aside for days that they just did their own thing. They respected each other's boundaries. They had time together and they had time apart. According to Karen, she had returned home from dinner with Steve at approximately 10:30 that Tuesday night. Paul had not yet arrived, but she claimed she wasn't particularly concerned, assuming he would return later. She went to sleep, expecting to either hear him come in or see him in the morning. Of course, Paul had never come home, and the police now believed his brutally murdered body had been found. The questions mounted. Was Karen truly telling the truth? Was the mysterious Steve genuinely just a friend? And what, if anything, did he know about Paul's disappearance and death? The investigation, now firmly a murder inquiry, pivoted sharply towards these crucial questions. The facade of the perfect, all-American family was not merely cracked, it had shattered. The immediate imperative for the investigators was to locate and interview Steve Richmond. The man Karen claimed was just a friend. He was a person of interest, not yet a suspect, but a critical piece in the emerging puzzle. Yet, as the police began their efforts to track him down, a new layer of suspicion settled upon the case. Steve, it turned out, was nowhere to be found. "They can't find him anywhere," an exasperated officer reported. "He's left the county, he's left the state." This sudden, unexplained departure immediately raised a red flag. Was Steve on the run? Was the relationship between him and Karen far more intimate than she had let on? And might this clandestine relationship be directly linked to the brutal murder of Paul Thompson? While the investigators launched an intensive effort to locate Steve Richmond, another avenue of inquiry began to yield disturbing results. A routine yet crucial step in any suspicious death investigation involves a thorough examination of the victim's financial affairs and those of the surviving spouse. In this case, a deep dive into Karen Thompson's financial records revealed information that strongly suggested a potential motive for murder. Just prior to Paul's death, Karen had initiated and acquired 2 separate life insurance policies on him. When the investigators tallied the combined payout of these policies, the sum was staggering. The amount added up to over $600,000. This figure, a substantial sum for any family, immediately cast a shadow of suspicion. Was it merely an unfortunate coincidence that Karen stood to inherit more than $500,000 from her husband's sudden, violent death? Or did this financial windfall represent a powerful, insidious motive for murder? The cold, hard numbers spoke a language that transcended casual explanation. Further adding to the growing body of circumstantial evidence, investigators reached out to Paul's co-workers. These individuals, who had spent countless hours with Paul in his professional environment, provided a vital window into the private struggles he had been enduring. Paul, it was revealed, had confided in his work colleagues that his marriage was deeply troubled. He harbored the painful suspicion that his wife, Karen, was engaged in an affair. This information, if true, directly contradicted Karen's emphatic denials to the police and provided a credible, if tragic, explanation for marital discord. But Paul's co-workers offered an even more chilling revelation. Stories that painted a terrifying picture of his last weeks. They start hearing some very strange stories about what had been happening to Paul eating up until. His dad, an investigator, recounted, the memory of those bizarre anecdotes still vivid. Several weeks prior to his death, Paul had experienced a terrifying incident at work. He had bitten into a tuna sandwich he'd prepared for lunch, only to discover a viscous, metallic substance oozing from within. The substance, later identified as mercury, would have been lethal had he ingested it. Out of the sandwich oozed mercury that would have been lethal had he swallowed it, a detailed account revealed. The immediate question for Paul, and later for the investigators, was how such a deadly poison could have found its way into his lunch. Paul, initially, pondered the possibility of industrial contamination, wondering if someone had tampered with the can of tuna at the factory. He had even contacted the manufacturer, but perhaps dismissing it as an isolated incident. He didn't leave a message because he thought it would be too much hassle. This seemingly minor detail, Paul's decision not to pursue the matter, would later be viewed through a far more sinister lens. What Paul had initially laughed it off as a morbid joke with his co-workers now resonated with chilling implications. Paul made the comment, "Karen made the sandwich when he was just trying to get rid of me." The casual, almost flippant remark, born of dark humor in the break room, now loomed as a terrifying premonition. With Paul now brutally murdered, the investigators were forced to confront a horrific possibility. Was it indeed possible that Karen, the woman who prepared his meals, had attempted to poison him with mercury? The mercury incident, combined with the discovery of the life insurance policies and the revelation of Paul's marital suspicions, began to coalesce into a powerful, albeit disturbing, narrative of premeditated murder. Armed with this rapidly accumulating body of information, the near-fatal mercury poisoning, the revelation of Karen's affair, and the substantial life insurance payout, the time had come to confront Karen Thompson directly. The investigators needed to shatter her carefully constructed facade, to pierce through her denials and evasions, and to extract genuine answers. The psychological chess match was about to begin. It was Monday, October 29th, a mere 5 days after Karen had initially reported Paul missing, and 3 days after his body had been positively identified. Karen was at her Avondale home, not alone, but with her brother, Vernon, who had recently arrived from Missouri, drawn by the grim news. She called me and said, "Well, they found him," and she told me what had happened. Vernon recounted, his voice still tinged with the memory of that somber call. "So I loaded up and went to Phoenix right away." The siblings were in the living room, a seemingly domestic scene, poring over Paul's insurance paperwork, a detail that, in retrospect, possessed a chilling irony. It was at this moment that the investigators, their resolve hardened by the disturbing revelations, knocked on the door. Vernon answered. When I opened up the door, there were 5 or 6 police officers and detectives. All had guns pointing at me. The dramatic entrance, a show of force, underscored the seriousness of their intent. The officers presented Karen with a search warrant. They had papers with them, and they showed them Karen, and she said, "This is a search warrant." While one team of investigators systematically began to search the house for evidence, another team escorted Karen into the back of a patrol car, taking her in for formal questioning. Vernon, witnessing the unfolding drama, felt a surge of fear. "That spooked me," he admitted. Yet Karen, ever the composed figure, maintained an outward appearance of calm. But she kept a cool head, and she didn't act like she was too worried when they let her out of the car whether they're not going to find anything. Her demeanor, perhaps a carefully cultivated mask, betrayed no immediate anxiety, but perhaps a misplaced confidence in the invisibility of her actions. Had she indeed spoken too soon? Inside the house, the meticulous search for evidence began to uncover even more layers of the potential financial motive. Scrutinizing the financial records belonging to Paul and Karen, investigators discovered a significant amount of credit card debt. They determined that she had run up $40,000 or $50,000 worth of credit card debt. This revelation, juxtaposed against the $600,000 life insurance payout, created a compelling, if grim, financial incentive. You're 50 grand in debt, and you've got this huge policy, and all of a sudden he comes up dead. An investigator articulated, the implications stark. In the middle of the desert, no ID. It really makes you start thinking. Then came the discovery that solidified the mercury poisoning incident as more than just a morbid joke. In the master bedroom, nestled in a vase near the headboard, investigators found a vial of mercury. This tangible evidence, a small but potent container of the deadly substance, directly corroborated Paul's earlier, chilling claim to his co-workers. The question, who has mercury in their house, hung heavy in the air, transforming Karen's earlier dismissive attitude towards the incident into a deeply suspicious one. It certainly looked suspicious, an understatement given the circumstances. However, Paul hadn't died of mercury poisoning. He had died from a horrific, multifaceted assault. The mercury, while damning circumstantial evidence of intent, wasn't enough, in isolation, to connect Karen directly to the scene of the murder. They needed more. They needed more details. They still couldn't put her at the scene of Paul's murder. Nevertheless, the investigators proceeded with the interrogation. Karen, now seated in the sterile, unyielding environment of the interrogation room, was confronted with the mounting evidence. The psychological pressure began to mount, a relentless tide against her composure. And as the heat and the pressure came onto Karen, her carefully constructed narrative began to buckle. Then she changes her story. First, Karen confessed that her portrayal of Steve Richmond as just a friend was a fabrication. She admitted the truth. Steve was not merely a friend, but her lover. Karen revealed that, well, Steve, who was with her, wasn't just a friend. He was her lover. She attempted to mitigate the impact of this confession by claiming their physical relationship had since cooled off, and they were now just friends. An echo of her earlier, disingenuous assertion. Yet, in a manipulative twist that hinted at her own psychological strategies, she subtly shifted blame. Karen hinted that Steve might have had a hard time accepting that it was over between them. She went further, weaving a narrative that painted Steve as dangerously infatuated, acknowledging that he loved her so much that he would have killed her husband just to be with her. And then came the truly chilling implication. Karen told the police that she feared that Steve had done just that. Her timeline for the night of Paul's disappearance also fractured under interrogation. Karen now admitted that the initial account she had given was incomplete, even misleading. Karen revealed that the timeline she gave investigators initially, it wasn't quite right. She now admitted that Steve wasn't with her the whole night. There was a period when Steve had actually left, and that she could not be accountable for where he was, and that she thought that he might have gone out and actually murdered her husband. This was a desperate attempt to redirect the spotlight of suspicion squarely onto Steve. A classic maneuver of deflection and projection. The investigators, seasoned observers of human deception, weren't entirely convinced by Karen's latest version of events. Her story, while now admitting to the affair, still felt incomplete, riddled with calculated omissions and strategic manipulations. Yet, for the moment, without direct, irrefutable evidence placing her at the murder scene, they found themselves in a bind. Sometimes it's all like a chess game, an investigator reflected, recognizing the strategic patience required in such complex cases. I make my move, I watch your finger move. With no immediate grounds for arrest despite the strong suspicions, the authorities were forced, reluctantly, to release Karen. However, their focus now sharpened with laser-like precision on Steve Richmond. Karen's new narrative, however self-serving, now implicated him as a potential killer. The way it sounded, he was involved in it, but they didn't know how much he had done. The pursuit of Steve became paramount. Finally, on November 1st, nearly a week after Paul's body had been found, the investigators located Steve Richmond. They had arrived at his house to serve a search warrant, hoping to uncover evidence related to Paul's murder. As they were conducting their search, a vehicle pulled up. It was Steve. The timing, almost as if fate had intervened, was serendipitous. Police finally bring him into the interrogation room. In the interrogation room, Steve began to unravel his side of the story. He revealed that he had met Karen more than a year earlier. At that time, Steve was navigating the tumultuous waters of his own divorce. Karen, having been through several painful relationships herself, seemed to offer a kindred spirit. Karen had been through several bad relationships, and that sort of bonded them at this time where he was struggling and reaching out for some comfort. This shared vulnerability, he claimed, provided the initial foundation for their connection. Comfort, according to Steve, quickly evolved into something far more illicit. He confirmed that he had indeed been engaged in an affair with Karen. Their relationship, he confessed, had rapidly escalated from friendly to flirtatious to adulterous. He also corroborated Karen's story about having dinner together on the evening Paul disappeared. However, Steve's account of what transpired after dinner diverged dramatically from Karen's carefully crafted narrative. Steve claimed that he was at home when Karen called him at an uncommonly late hour, 11:30 at night. She was, he recounted, frantic and distraught. According to Steve, Karen told him she was waiting for him outside his residence. When he opened the door, a chilling realization washed over him. Steve told police that on the night that Paul went missing, that Karen had Paul's truck. This detail, that Karen was in possession of the victim's vehicle, was a profound contradiction of her earlier statements. Karen, according to Steve, was in desperate need of his help. She told him she needed his help getting rid of the truck. Steve, seemingly swept up in the urgent and distressing situation, claims he didn't question her at that critical moment. He did what she said. According to his testimony, he and Karen then drove Paul's truck to a remote highway northeast of Phoenix, where they abandoned it. This was the same truck that the passerby would discover hours later, engine running, headlights on. But their clandestine actions didn't stop at abandoning the truck. Steve confessed that they had meticulously removed all of Paul's property, his wallet, his identification. Steve also took Paul's work computer, which had been in his truck. Then, after Steve had driven Karen back to her own car, he helped her dispose of these incriminating items. He admitted that, at Karen's explicit instruction, he had burned it along with Karen's clothing. Referring to Paul's wallet and identification, the laptop, a piece of professional equipment, was also discarded. Steve told police that he took the laptop and he threw it off an overpass into the desert. The laptop, unlike the wallet and clothing, would later be recovered, providing a tangible link to Steve's testimony. And then came the most crucial piece of evidence that Steve admitted to disposing of, the one that truly captured the investigators' attention. The evidence that Steve was told to dispose of included a .380 handgun. Steve confessed to having, throwing it into a local lake. The question that immediately sprang to mind for the investigators: was this the murder weapon? Steve claimed it was. He told the police that Karen had informed him it was the gun that had killed Paul. But, he relayed Karen's explanation, it wasn't murder in the traditional sense. Karen had claimed that she and Paul were out in the desert and that Paul attacked her. She alleged there was a struggle over a gun and that she killed him in self-defense. This was Karen's purported justification, relayed to her lover, Steve, as he helped her cover up the crime. The investigators, while acknowledging Steve's culpability in the post-crime cover-up, found his story far more credible than Karen's shifting narratives. Enough of Steve's detailed account, particularly the precise locations of the abandoned truck and the discarded laptop, aligned with known facts and eventually recoverable evidence to convince them of his veracity. Although it was clear he was culpable in covering up the crime after the fact, enough of Steve's story added up that police were convinced that he was telling the truth. However, believing Steve's story did not mean believing Karen's self-defense claim. The sheer brutality of Paul's injuries, the numerous conflicting stories, the strategic disposal of evidence, Paul being shot in the back, the substantial credit cards, the massive insurance policy, and the chilling discovery of the mercury all pointed to a far more cold-blooded act than a frantic struggle for survival. The weight of the evidence, meticulously gathered and analyzed, now firmly pointed to Karen Thompson as the orchestrator, if not the direct perpetrator, of Paul's murder. Prosecutors, armed with this compelling, albeit largely circumstantial, case, felt confident. Prosecutors were ready to go forward against Karen with a charge of first-degree murder. On November 4th, the Buckeye police moved decisively. Karen Thompson was taken into custody, arrested for the murder of her husband, Paul. The arrest sent shockwaves through her family, particularly her 3 children. Her then 17-year-old daughter, Janet, recalled the profound confusion and fear. They didn't say anything to us. They wouldn't tell us because we were kids. The adult members of the family, equally reeling, struggled to process the devastating news. My uncle tried to tell me, and we didn't know how to handle the situation that we were in. The children were left in a limbo of uncertainty, wondering how long they would endure this nightmare, and how long their mother would remain incarcerated. The once perfect, happy, all-American family had been irrevocably shattered, its dark secrets now exposed to the harsh light of justice. The path to justice, however, is rarely linear, often fraught with legal complexities and evidentiary challenges. By November 4, 2001, more than a week had elapsed since Karen Thompson's husband, Paul, had been discovered dead in the Arizona desert, subjected to an unimaginable barrage of violence. He was shot. He was stabbed. He was clubbed about the head. The stark reality of Paul's final moments painted a grim picture of a vicious, personal attack. Paul's family, struggling to reconcile the public persona of Karen with the grim reality of her alleged actions, was convinced of her culpability. She'd been having this affair for a year. There was no one else that I could see that would want to. Come, one family member asserted, echoing the conviction that had begun to solidify in the hearts of those closest to Paul. The authorities, for their part, concurred. Karen's arrest for murder, based largely on the testimony of her lover, Steve Richmond, represented a significant step forward. Steve's detailed account of being called by Karen on the night Paul disappeared, and his subsequent involvement in helping her dispose of evidence, was a crucial piece of the prosecutorial puzzle. He admitted to ditching Paul's wallet, identification, laptop, and most critically, a .380 handgun into a local lake, a weapon that, devastatingly, was never recovered. The recovery of Paul's work computer, however, provided a powerful corroboration of Steve's narrative. Steve was able to tell detectives exactly where he dropped the laptop over the overpass, a detail that could only have come from direct involvement. Yet, despite Steve's seemingly incriminating testimony, Karen, after her arrest, continued to maintain her innocence. Her narrative shifted once more, now painting Steve as the architect of Paul's demise. She pointed the finger at Steve, saying that she had nothing to do with it, and that Steve was Paul's killer. This was the quintessential he said, she said scenario. A legal quagmire where 2 individuals point fingers at one another, leaving investigators and prosecutors in a precarious position. The challenges for the prosecution were formidable. While they possessed a body and a clear understanding of the horrific manner of Paul's death, a critical element was missing: irrefutable forensic evidence linking either Karen or Steve directly to the act of murder. The remote desert site where Paul's body had been discovered, ravaged by ATV tracks and the elements, offered little in the way of pristine forensic clues. Because ATVs had passed through, this crime scene had been contaminated. A lamentable reality for the investigators. Compounding this, the police, in the early hours of the investigation, when Paul was still considered merely a missing person, had inadvertently compromised another crucial piece of evidence. The police actually returned it to Karen without any evidence being extracted from it with any processing or analysis by the police. This decision, made under the assumption of a non-criminal disappearance, effectively rendered the truck useless as evidence, erasing a potential trove of forensic data. Without concrete forensic links placing Karen at the crime scene, the prosecution found itself in a serious bind. The case against her, however compelling circumstantially, was built largely on the conflicting testimonies of 2 individuals deeply entangled in the crime. both with motives to deflect blame. Prosecutors couldn't make a case against Karen without some evidence that put her on the crime scene. Faced with this daunting evidentiary hurdle, the legal system made a difficult decision. Prosecutors were forced to let her go. For Paul's family, this decision was nothing short of horrifying. The news that Karen was released sent a chilling wave of fear through them. It gave us kind of an eerie feeling, a family member admitted. If she had done that to Paul, was she going to come after us? The emotional toll was immense, compounded by a profound sense of injustice. Once out of jail, Karen, perhaps seeking to escape the oppressive shadow of the Arizona desert and the glare of local suspicion, left Phoenix and returned to Missouri. She moved in with my sister, which is just about a mile up the road here. A family member recounted. She made a conscious effort to compartmentalize Paul's death, to put it behind her. A common psychological defense mechanism for those seeking to avoid accountability. She really didn't want to talk about it. After she moved here, I think she didn't want to be bothered with it anymore. Then, in an astonishingly swift turnaround, a mere 3 months after her initial arrest for murder and Paul's tragic death, Karen married yet again in January of 2002. This fourth marriage, to a man named Mr. Sanchez, raised a fresh set of alarms, particularly for Paul's family and those who knew Karen's history. That seemed pretty strange to me, one observed, the understatement palpable. She married this Mr. Sanchez. He had done a little prison time. I had a record. Wasn't the nicest guy in town, but she fell for him. How she met him, I don't know. The psychological pattern of attraction to bad boys seemed to reassert itself with alarming predictability. But I was appalled after she killed her husband. She married him. That sends a red flag to every and any body, a family member exclaimed. The moral outrage evident. Karen's behavior, however, would soon become even more disturbing, revealing a reckless disregard for legal boundaries and familial bonds. It all began shortly after her initial arrest, when her third husband, Bob Mahala, had been granted temporary custody of their 8-year-old son, Karen's youngest child. Bob, still grappling with the revelation of Karen's alleged involvement in murder, was in shock. There was a shock to get that phone call that the girl that you were married to murdered somebody. Despite the charges against Karen being dropped, Bob was preparing to petition the courts for full, permanent custody of their son, fearing for his child's safety and well-being in Karen's care. But Karen had other, more desperate, plans. She contacted Bob, requesting a meeting at a McDonald's, ostensibly to see her son. She could drive down here, Bob agreed, his empathy for his son's longing overriding his deep-seated reservations about Karen. I agreed. I felt for her. Every child misses their mom. My son missed his mom. He cried at night. So I said, let's have lunch with your mom at McDonald's. The meeting, arranged for the afternoon of February 24, 2002, quickly devolved into chaos. Bob arrived with their son, only to find Karen, her 16-year-old daughter, and 2 other men waiting. He came in the door with the little boy and Karen, her 16-year-old daughter at the time, and 2 guys were in there. Without warning, the 2 men accompanying Karen sneezed Bob, a euphemism for pepper spraying him. I was trying to do a good thing because my son missed his mother, and it ended up backfiring where my son got kidnapped, Bob recounted, the trauma evident in his voice. Karen, seizing the opportunity, grabbed the boy and ran out the other door, while her accomplices continued their assault. And he started getting up, and they maced him again. Blinded and disoriented, Bob struggled to call for help. And I had to call the cops, but I couldn't see the phone because I was maced. Eventually, he managed to contact the police, initiating an immediate statewide alert. Law enforcement pursued Karen and her accomplices. There was all points below what to now for, and they got as far up as 20 or 30 miles to the town north of Springfield. They might have gone further, but the police managed to intercept Karen. She was arrested, but a legal loophole emerged. The authorities were unsure who had official custody of the little boy at that exact moment. Consequently, they released her, and they never brought any charges. Bob eventually regained custody of his son, but the entire harrowing experience left him profoundly shaken and infuriated. I'm livid, he declared, his voice trembling with anger and disbelief. Why is this woman not in prison for murder? She already killed one guy. The seeming impunity with which Karen operated was baffling. We couldn't figure it out. But the detective was telling me they're waiting for forensics. That's all he kept saying. We just gotta wait. We've gotta wait. Not enough evidence yet. The pursuit of justice for Paul seemed to be an agonizingly slow and frustrating process. However, as it turned out, Bob's wait, though emotionally draining, would not be interminable. In May of 2002, a mere 6 months after Karen's initial arrest for murder, and less than 3 months after her brazen attempt to abduct her son, the authorities in Arizona were finally ready to act. The turning point was Steve Richmond. They had to deal with Steve, an official noted, acknowledging the critical role of the star witness. Apparently, Karen's ex-lover, Steve, had grown increasingly disaffected by her manipulative behavior. He had not appreciated the fact that she had not only entangled him in a murder and its cover-up, but had then attempted to pin the entire crime on him, all while running off to marry another man. The shifting allegiances, the betrayal, and the very real legal jeopardy Karen had placed him in ultimately proved to be her undoing. Police are able to convince him to testify against Karen. This was the breakthrough the prosecution desperately needed. With Steve's cooperation secured, the legal landscape shifted dramatically. In May, the police were once again at Karen's door, this time with definitive evidence and a renewed sense of purpose. They busted her door down and arrested her for Paul's murder. For Paul's devastated family, the news brought a profound sense of relief. A fragile hope that justice might finally be within reach. It was a relief when I knew she was behind bars. She couldn't do any more to hurt any of our family. Anymore. But the question remained, now that she was back in custody, did they have enough evidence? Enough testimony, enough psychological insight, to make the murder charges stick this time? The legal battle, a gruelingly long and emotionally charged ordeal, was far from over. The long and arduous journey towards accountability culminated on December 21st, 2004, more than 3 years after Paul Thompson's brutal murder. 40-year-old Karen Sanchez, formerly Karen Thompson, finally stood in court, facing murder charges for the death of her husband in the Arizona desert. For Paul's family, the passage of time had been a source of immense frustration. I just remember frustration that it seemed like it took forever to charge her and to get on with. The process, a family member expressed, reflecting the common sentiment of victims' families caught in the slow grind of the legal system. The decisive breakthrough, the pivot that allowed the prosecution to move forward, was the cooperation of Karen's former lover, Steve Richmond. Steve, facing his own legal jeopardy for his role in the cover-up, had agreed to a plea bargain. Steve, in exchange for a very favorable outcome, would testify against Karen, and he would tell a jury about what she confessed to him. This was the linchpin, the crucial eyewitness testimony needed to overcome the previous evidentiary weaknesses. Crucially, once Steve agreed to testify, his account of Karen's confession evolved. His initial statement, that Karen claimed self-defense, was revised. Steve, in his deposition, said that she had wanted to get rid of him. The motive, he now revealed, was clear and cold. She didn't want to go through another divorce. She'd been through too much. She had too much to lose. This psychological insight into Karen's motivation, the avoidance of another emotionally and financially draining divorce, the desire to preserve her perceived autonomy and material gains, painted a damning picture. Look at what Karen stood to gain, a prosecutor might argue: money from a life insurance policy, a home, autonomy. Beyond Steve's testimony, the prosecution had also unearthed other critical witnesses who could corroborate Karen's murderous intent. People are pointing the finger at Karen, saying that she had tried to hire them to kill her husband. These individuals, who Karen had approached in her desperate search for a hitman, had all declined, stating they weren't into doing stuff like that. But their combined testimony, detailing Karen's attempts to solicit murder, significantly bolstered the prosecution's case, transforming a he said she said into a compelling narrative of premeditated murder. That she had offered them money to try and kill her husband. Those facts together supported the prosecution's case. The revelation that she had actively sought to hire a hitman suggested a deep-seated, calculating malice, one that could carry the ultimate legal consequence. Indeed, the gravity of these revelations led prosecutors to seek the harshest penalty. Prosecutors sought the death penalty. However, even with these developments, the case was not a guaranteed victory for the prosecution. This definitely wasn't a slam-dunk case, a legal analyst observed. It wasn't a sure thing for prosecutors. The inherent challenges of a circumstantial case, even one bolstered by an accomplice's testimony, meant that a jury trial carried significant risks. The absence of direct forensic evidence linking Karen to the murder scene remained a vulnerability. Prosecutors recognized the potential for a compromise, a deal that would ensure a conviction, even if it fell short of the death penalty. They realized that they had a compromise if they were certain of getting any conviction at all. With the trial date looming, the prosecution approached Karen's defense attorney with an offer: plead guilty for second-degree murder for a 20-year flat sentence. For Paul's family, this was a bitter pill to swallow, a profound disappointment given the brutal nature of his death and the clear evidence of premeditation. Yet, they understood the pragmatic realities of the legal system. The prosecutors presented the stark choice. They said, "Do you want to take the chance to go to a trial and take swinger, shadow of a doubt, and she walks?" The risk of an acquittal, of Karen walking free, was simply too great to bear. That made it pretty much an easy decision at that point. On December 21, 2004, Karen Thompson, now Karen Sanchez, accepted the deal. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, receiving a stipulated sentence of 20 calendar years in prison with no early release. She would be 57 years old upon her release, having spent a significant portion of her adult life incarcerated. But for Paul's family, and for those who had followed the case, the question of whether this sentence truly represented justice lingered. Was 20 years enough for a crime of such horrific brutality and cold-blooded calculation? Paul Thompson endured a horrific and violent death, a stark reminder of the suffering inflicted. And then there was the senseless nature of the crime, the profound human cost of a life taken out of a perceived need to avoid another divorce. After 3 divorces, why did Karen decide that Paul had to die? It's a question that continues to haunt those who knew him, and those who attempt to understand the darker aspects of human psychology. It's what I've tried to ask myself, for 15 years now. When I don't just walk away. The story of Karen Thompson and Paul Thompson serves as a chilling testament to the deceptive power of outward appearances. The perfect, happy, all-American family was nothing more than a meticulously crafted facade, behind which lurked debt, infidelity, and ultimately murder. Karen's journey through multiple marriages, her consistent attraction to tumultuous relationships, and her eventual resort to lethal violence, paint a disturbing psychological portrait of a woman driven by a desperate need for control, convenience, and perhaps a fundamental lack of empathy. Her repeated attempts to escape marital dissatisfaction through divorce were eventually replaced by a far more permanent solution, one that sought to eliminate the source of her perceived inconvenience rather than navigate its complexities. This case also underscores the tireless efforts of investigative forces who, despite initial setbacks and the challenges of compromised crime scenes, persistently pursued the truth. Their strategic patience, their ability to piece together fragments of testimony and circumstantial evidence, and their ultimate success in securing cooperation from an accomplice, were crucial in bringing a measure of justice to Paul Thompson's memory. The pursuit of justice, particularly in cases where the truth is obscured by calculated deception, often requires immense dedication, perseverance, and a deep understanding of human psychology. The profound humanistic meaning of this narrative lies in its cautionary tale. The importance of looking beyond superficial perfection, of recognizing the insidious patterns of manipulation and control, and of upholding the sanctity of human life. While the justice meted out may never fully assuage the grief and outrage of Paul's family, it stands as a testament to the triumph of good over evil, a reminder that even the deepest secrets of the desert and the darkest corners of the human heart can eventually be brought to light. It is a healthy entertainment, in its truest sense, when it inspires us to reflect, to learn, and to forever honor the memory of those who suffer at the hands of malevolence. The desert has a way of holding secrets. Its vast, silent expanses can swallow events whole, leaving only the sun-baked ground and the whispering winds to bear witness. But sometimes, even the desert is compelled to yield its truths, no matter how grim or how deeply buried. Such was the case with the disappearance and subsequent discovery of Paul Thompson, a story that would unravel the illusion of a perfect, all-American family and expose the chilling machinations of a soul bereft of empathy. As a professional criminal psychology analyst and one who endeavors to capture the human condition, in narrative, the unfolding of this particular drama offers a profound, albeit somber, lesson in the deceptive facades people construct. It is a stark reminder that what appears outwardly idyllic may, beneath the surface, conceal currents of deep-seated turmoil and calculated malevolence. The year was 2001, and America was still reeling from the shock of a national tragedy. Yet, in the quiet, suburban community of Avondale, Arizona, a city of 75,000 residents nestled on the western periphery of Phoenix, another, more personal tragedy was about to begin its slow, agonizing reveal. On a Wednesday morning, specifically October 24th, Karen Thompson, then 37 years of age, placed a worried call to the local police department. Her husband, Paul Thompson, a man of 31 years, had not returned home from work the night before. This simple, declarative statement, "hadn't come home from work the night before," was the pebble dropped into the tranquil pond, the first ripple of a storm that would soon engulf an entire family. Karen, by all accounts, appeared frantic. Her voice, laced with a tremor of fear, conveyed a desperate concern to the dispatcher. She articulated the common refrain of a spouse suddenly confronted with an inexplicable absence. Karen wakes up and Paul's not there. And she's frantic. "We were thinking something maybe bad happened to him, because he's not the type to just go." This initial statement, seemingly innocuous, would later be scrutinized for its subtle undercurrents. For the narrative Karen was beginning to construct, a narrative designed to shape perceptions and deflect suspicion. From a psychological standpoint, such an immediate and overt display of panic, while natural for a genuinely distressed spouse, can also be a performative act, a carefully calibrated performance for the benefit of official record. The trained ear of an emergency dispatcher, accustomed to a wide spectrum of human reactions, might note its intensity, but at this early stage, it would likely be catalogued as genuine distress. The morning hours leading up to that phone call to the authorities had been consumed by a flurry of increasingly worried outreach. Karen had reached out to a multitude of friends and family members, each conversation a reiteration of the same unsettling news. Paul was missing. The replies she received echoed her own bewilderment. One relative recalled her words, imbued with a bewildered simplicity. "She called me on the phone and told me that he was missing, and it's just a big surprise." I said, "Well, was he really upset or depressed about something?" She said no. There wasn't anything wrong with him. He just didn't come home. The sheer simplicity of that statement, juxtaposed against the profound anxiety it evoked, was deeply unsettling. "That just really shook me," the relative later recounted. A sentiment that resonated with everyone in Paul's orbit. The inexplicable nature of Paul's absence was the most jarring element. Individuals do not simply vanish without a trace, particularly those with established routines and familial responsibilities. None of Karen and Paul's family had any idea where he could be either. The collective ignorance only magnified the burgeoning sense of dread. The family's efforts extended beyond mere phone calls. I called a lot of our relations, sisters and brothers and friends, the people that I cleaned for, to keep Paul in their prayers. This collective outpouring of concern, a natural human response to crisis, highlighted the communal shock. By mid-morning, with no answers forthcoming, the police were finally engaged. Karen, described by one officer as pretty upset, declared her ignorance. She didn't know what to do. "We don't know why he's missing or where he's missing." The stage was set for a mystery that would soon morph into something far more sinister. A tragedy cloaked in the deceptive veil of a perfect life. A chance discovery on a remote desert roadside, miles from the Thompsons' suburban home, would soon inject a stark, almost theatrical, element into the unfolding enigma. A vehicle, abandoned under peculiar circumstances, presented a new, perplexing layer to the case. It was an anomaly that screamed of an untold story, a disruption of the mundane that demanded explanation. It looked like he walked out from that truck and simply vanished from the face of the earth. A law enforcement official would later observe, a statement that perfectly captured the initial, baffling nature of Paul Thompson's disappearance. The initial picture painted was one of an unexplained vanishing act, a man dissolving into the vast, indifferent landscape. Yet, as with all carefully constructed illusions, the facade of this perfect, all-American family was about to crumble, revealing the darker truths that lay beneath. The initial bewilderment would slowly, agonizingly, give way to a horrifying understanding, exposing not a vanishing, but a brutal, calculated end. To understand the unraveling of the Thompson family, one must first understand its foundational elements, particularly the woman at its perceived center. Karen, born in the year 1964. Karen's early life began far removed from the sun-drenched, arid expanses of the Southwest. Her roots were firmly planted in the rich, fertile soil of Kankakee, Illinois, a small, rural town south of the bustling metropolis of Chicago. Here, life revolved around the rhythm of the land. Most everybody around there farmed is rural, and we always had country things to do. A family member recalled, painting a picture of a community deeply connected to agrarian traditions, where values of hard work, community, and the simple pleasures of rural life were often paramount. This background, so seemingly wholesome and grounding, would later stand in stark contrast to the sophisticated deceits she would employ. For Karen, the youngest of 6 children, this meant a childhood imbued with a love for the outdoors and a particular affinity for animals. She was, by all accounts, a natural equestrian, capable of riding horses almost as soon as she was able to walk. She loved horses. She loved being outside and taking care of animals and stuff. Her sister reminisced, painting a picture of an active, nature-loving child. This earthy connection, however, was balanced by an equally strong social dynamism. Despite being the youngest, Karen was never one to fade into the background. She was always very outgoing. She made friends easy. She's pretty outspoken. She'll let you know what she thinks. Another family member noted, describing a personality that was both magnetic and assertive. This blend of rural charm and innate assertiveness made her a memorable figure in her hometown, suggesting a strong will and a desire to be seen and heard. Beyond her vibrant personality, Karen also possessed a sharp intellect. And she had brains as well as personality. She was always really smart, and she was really good in math, her sister proudly declared, underscoring her academic capabilities. Such academic prowess, combined with her love for animals, led many in her family to harbor specific aspirations for her future. A lot of the people in her family thought that she would end up going into veterinarian school and working with horses. The path seemed clear, charted by talent and passion, a trajectory towards a respectable and fulfilling profession that aligned with her childhood affections. Yet, as is often the case in the complex tapestry of human life, an unforeseen thread began to weave itself into Karen's destiny, diverting her from the expected trajectory. This thread, a recurring motif in her life, was her unfortunate attraction to a particular type of individual, a pattern that, from a psychological perspective, often indicates deeper unresolved emotional needs or a subconscious desire for drama and intensity. She might have lived up to those expectations too, if not for the one thing she loved besides horses. Karen went for bad boys. She was attracted to the type of guys who did not treat her well. This poignant observation, articulated by those who knew her best, spoke volumes. Her repeated gravitation towards partners who were emotionally unavailable, unreliable, or even volatile, suggests a pattern of seeking validation or excitement through challenging relationships, perhaps mistaking intensity for intimacy. This pattern, a siren song to tumultuous relationships, pulled her away from the academic path. Instead of pursuing higher education, Karen, upon graduating high school in 1982, sought to put geographical distance between herself and a particularly painful breakup. She relocated to Oklahoma, drawn by the prospect of new employment opportunities and the presence of other sisters who had also moved there. There were jobs out there and some other sisters had moved out there, so she went out there too. Her sister explained, detailing a common migratory pattern for young adults seeking a fresh start and a new identity. In Oklahoma, Karen embarked upon her first marriage, a union that brought her 2 daughters. However, after 6 years, the marriage dissolved into divorce. Another chapter in her burgeoning history of failed relationships. The details of this separation remain somewhat vague, even to those closest to her. I don't know a lot about why they separated. I was way too young to even know. One of her daughters later confessed, highlighting the emotional distance and protective barriers often erected around such adult upheavals, shielding the children from the full weight of their parents' discord. Soon after, a geographical shift once more marked a new chapter in Karen's life. She moved to Texas to be closer to her brother and entered into a second marriage. This union, however, proved equally ephemeral. Her second husband, a member of the armed services, was frequently absent due to deployments. He was in the service, so he was gone quite a little bit, a family member recounted. The strains of separation, coupled with the inherent challenges of military life on a marriage, eventually proved too much, and when he got out of the service, it didn't work out real well. By 1992, after less than 3 years of marriage, Karen once again found herself navigating the turbulent waters of separation and eventual divorce. Now with 3 children dependent on her. The pattern was becoming established, a quick progression into marriage, followed by a relatively swift dissolution. It was during this period of transition, working in the floral department of an Arkansas grocery store, that the then 27-year-old Karen encountered Bob Mahala. Bob, a newcomer to the area, had a casual inquiry about horseback riding that led him to Karen. One of the girls at the register. I asked about horseback riding. She said her girlfriend in the floral department had 2 horses. So, I go to the floral department and I meet Karen. A seemingly innocent introduction quickly blossomed into something more. Newly single, Karen accepted Bob's invitation to go riding. Their shared passion for horses, a thread from Karen's childhood, provided an immediate connection. A common ground upon which a new relationship could be built. I just felt for her. She was a very pretty lady and very fun, Bob admitted. The initial attraction evident. After several rides, their relationship deepened, and they began dating. The relationship progressed rapidly, a characteristic pace for Karen's romantic endeavors, culminating in Karen becoming pregnant. Karen, still legally married to her second husband, promptly divorced him and, in the fall of 1992, married Bob. However, the optimism of this new beginning was short-lived. Almost as soon as Karen and her 2 daughters moved in with their new stepfather, fissures began to appear. Bob, suddenly confronted with the realities of instant fatherhood, felt overwhelmed and unprepared. I wasn't ready to be a dad. When here I am a dad. Now I've got a family. These little girls look up to me. They're calling me Dad. Daddy Bob. The endearing term, Daddy Bob, belied the internal struggle he faced. The sudden weight of responsibility proving too heavy for his young shoulders. His psychological readiness for such a commitment was clearly lacking. A common pitfall in rapid-fire relationships where emotional foundations are often not robustly built. This domestic arrangement, burdened by Bob's reluctance to fully embrace his new role, crumbled in less than a year, not long after the birth of their son. I went down the street and got my own apartment, and I filed for divorce, Bob recounted. A stark testament to the speed with which his commitment evaporated. Karen was once again on her own with 3 kids to raise. Yet, despite the emotional and financial strain, she remained resolute in her commitment to her children. She was very good at making sure we had everything we needed. She always tried her best to do special things for each of us to feel important, her daughter attested. The children, shielded from the full brunt of their mother's struggles, perceived a woman doing her best. So when she was struggling, we didn't know. This ability to present a composed front, to conceal internal struggles, would later manifest in more sinister ways. Having quit her florist job during her pregnancy, Karen sought employment to support her burgeoning family. She found temporary work at the local airport, a job that involved the arduous task of loading bags onto the plane. This physically demanding temporary role, however, proved to be an unexpected catalyst, sparking a new professional ambition. Working at the airport for Karen, it opened her world up, a family member observed. Recognizing the transformative power of new experiences and the psychological pull of a new challenge, the 29-year-old Karen decided to pursue a career as a travel agent, a path that would not only offer a new professional direction, but also lead her to the man she hoped would finally provide the stability she craved, Paul Thompson. This career shift indicated a drive for upward mobility and a desire for a more sophisticated life, perhaps reflecting an aspiration for control and a degree of social cachet. Paul Thompson, 6 years Karen's junior, shared a similar small-town Midwestern upbringing. He was born in Blue Earth, Minnesota, and spent the first 13.5 years of his life in northern Iowa. However, in stark contrast to Karen's outgoing nature, Paul was an introverted, quiet child. Although unlike Karen, he was a quiet, introverted child. So that's why I remember he didn't have as many friends in school growing up. And, yeah, I remember the majority of his time was spent in his room reading, his brother reflected. This solitary inclination, rather than being a hindrance, served Paul well academically. The habit served Paul well in school. In school, he was a straight A student. He pretty much sucked everything in. His dedication to learning and his quiet diligence painted a picture of a thoughtful, methodical individual, a stark contrast to Karen's more boisterous and impulsive tendencies. Despite his academic aptitude, financial constraints precluded a direct path to college. Instead, Paul opted for military service, joining the Army. So rather than go to college, Paul joined the Army. Paul went to England for 2 years and to Germany for 2 years. His time in the service took him across continents, exposing him to different cultures and instilling in him a sense of discipline and purpose. Inspired by his overseas experiences, upon his discharge, Paul pursued classes to become a travel agent, a decision that would providentially lead him to Karen. His life trajectory, marked by quiet dedication and a search for stability, would eventually intertwine with Karen's more tumultuous path. Their initial encounter, as Karen herself described it, held an almost cinematic quality, viewed through the lens of her assertive personality. She told me one time that he was sitting at the table, and this was when they were in travel agency school. She said, looking over at him, I just figured, well, he looks like such a nice, quiet guy just sitting there, and I should go over and meet him. For the reserved loner that Paul was, this direct approach from an attractive woman was a novel experience. The reserved loner didn't know what to make of it at first. He was taken aback a bit that a woman, who he saw was attractive, was engaging him. It was something very different than he had ever dealt with before. Paul, perhaps subconsciously yearning for connection. But he certainly appreciated the attention. Paul really did fall hard for her. Soon, they were dating. The classic adage, opposites attract, seemed to manifest in their burgeoning relationship, with Paul's quiet steadiness offering a perceived anchor to Karen's more restless spirit. Opposites attract, and that's probably what attracted him to her, a friend surmised, recognizing the complementary, if ultimately unstable, dynamic. Not long after her third divorce was finalized, Karen and her 3 children moved in with Paul. The speed of this cohabitation raised eyebrows, particularly that of her ex-husband, Bob. I was mad. I said, wow, that's quick. We're just divorced. And you're already in with this other guy a month later. Yet, Paul's inherent easygoing nature eventually won over even a skeptical Bob. But Paul's easygoing nature even won over Karen's ex-husband. He was very good with the children. And the children liked Paul. Paul, it seemed, genuinely embraced his new role, providing the kind of paternal presence Bob had struggled to offer. Paul really thought the world of her kids. And he offered Karen a welcome break from her string of failed relationships. He represented someone who maybe could provide that stability that she had sought out her entire life. This perception of stability, however, was likely more about what Karen desired than the true depth of their foundational connection. Paul's steady presence offered a stark contrast to the bad boys of her past, a perceived opportunity for a different kind of life. For the next 3 years, Karen, Paul, and the kids made their home in Missouri. But in 1997, an opportunity arose that would lead them west. Paul's brother, working for a telephone company, informed him of a job opening in Arizona. The prospect of stable employment and good income was particularly appealing to Paul, who was the primary financial support for Karen and her children. His brother worked for a telephone company, which sounded pretty good to Paul because he was supporting her and the kids. This decision highlighted Paul's sense of responsibility and his commitment to providing for his new family. Upon their arrival in Arizona, they settled in Avondale, a tranquil suburban community located approximately 30 minutes west of the bustling cityscape of Phoenix. And after more than 3 years together, Karen and Paul finally formalized their union. He'd wanted to marry her pretty bad, a family member shared, underscoring Paul's commitment and his desire for a traditional family structure. The wedding took place in August of 1998 at a Phoenix hotel. The arid Arizona summer ensured a memorable event, with temperatures soaring to a scorching 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet no one seemed to mind the heat of an outdoor courtyard wedding. It was really very much a storybook wedding and a very happy day. Everyone present saw an optimistic future for this newly formed family. Paul was thriving in the telecommunications field, earning a commendable income, and Karen had found her dream job as a travel agent. She'd booked several different things for me over the years, and she was a very flirtatious, fun-type person, you know, so she was always trying to be the best deal that she could. This description hints at Karen's continued charm and her ability to engage effectively with people, traits that could be used for both positive and deceptive ends. By the autumn of 2001, the bright future envisioned at their wedding seemed to have fully materialized. The Thompson family had seamlessly integrated into the fabric of suburban American life. They became a very traditional type of family, the type of family that went to PTA meetings, the type of family that went to after-school activities. The outward appearance was one of idyllic harmony. It was the perfect, happy, all-American family. This carefully constructed image of suburban normalcy, however, served as a potent psychological barrier, making the impending disruption all the more shocking and difficult to comprehend. But as any seasoned observer of human nature knows, perfection is often a fragile construct, a meticulously crafted illusion designed to conceal the cracks beneath. Was this family, seemingly so robust and contented, truly too good to last? The answer would come chillingly swiftly, just months after their third wedding anniversary, when Paul Thompson would, indeed, suddenly disappear. The stage had been set, the characters introduced, and the curtain was about to rise on a dark and disturbing act that would expose the hollow core of their perceived perfection. The immediate aftermath of Paul's disappearance was marked by a chilling discovery that only deepened the mystery, introducing an element of inexplicable abandonment that initially defied logical explanation. It was a little after midnight on October 24th, in the desolate desert expanse north of Phoenix, when a passing motorist first noticed a strange anomaly. A truck, incongruously parked on the side of a remote road, in a remote area, its headlights piercing the inky blackness, its engine purring softly, yet eerily devoid of a driver. What was so unusual, it was on the side of the road, in a remote area. The headlights were on, and the engine was still running. The unusual nature of this scene immediately piqued the motorist's curiosity. In the middle of taking his girlfriend home after a date, the passerby didn't initially stop. But the image of the abandoned vehicle gnawed at him, a subconscious warning perhaps. After dropping off his girlfriend, a sense of unease compelled him to circle back. 45 minutes had elapsed, yet the truck remained precisely where he had last seen it. A ghost in the night, still running, still illuminated. 45 minutes later, he'd gone to his girlfriend's, and it was still running with lights on. This persistence of the scene, the unmoving vehicle, signaled a deeper problem than a mere momentary stop. Worried that the driver might be in distress, perhaps suffering a medical emergency in the unforgiving desert, the passerby decided to investigate. He wanted to check it out and see if someone was around there. He approached the truck cautiously, peering into its empty cabin, scanning the surrounding darkness. There was no one. The vehicle appeared to have been simply abandoned, its keys still in the ignition, its engine still running, as if its driver had been spirited away in an instant. It was just as if he had been locked away. Puzzled and deeply unsettled, the passerby contacted 911. His responsible actions, driven by civic concern, unknowingly initiated the uncovering of a much darker truth. When deputies from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office arrived, they were met with the same profound bewilderment. The scene offered no immediate answers, no obvious signs of struggle or foul play. "There's no blood. There's no weapons. There's no signs of foul play," one deputy reported. It didn't appear to be a carjacking. There were tools, valuable tools in the truck, untouched. This absence of a clear criminal act was, in itself, a confounding factor. The psychological profile of an abandoned vehicle usually suggests either a hasty escape after a crime, a breakdown, or an intentional, less sinister abandonment. This specific scene fit none of those easily. However, running the truck's license plate did provide a couple of crucial clues. The vehicle belonged to Paul Thompson, a 31-year-old man residing nearly an hour away in Avondale, Arizona. And when the sheriff's deputies contacted Paul's wife, Karen Thompson, then 37, she told them that Paul hadn't come home that night. Karen reported that her husband, 31-year-old Paul Thompson, hadn't come home from work the night before. This was the official link connecting the strange desert discovery to the missing persons report. Once the truck was found, even Karen was worried and upset because it was such a bizarre area for this truck to be. Her reaction, again, could be interpreted in multiple ways. Genuine concern for Paul's safety in a remote, dangerous location, or a carefully crafted performance designed to divert suspicion from her own knowledge. There was no good explanation as to why Paul would have been in such a remote desert area so far away from home. This lack of logical explanation was a persistent red flag for investigators, even at this early stage. However, since there were no overt signs of foul play, no blood, no struggle, no theft, the authorities, in a move that would later be viewed with profound regret, turned the truck over to Karen and the family. Paul remained a missing person, and there was no other real evidence. This decision, seemingly routine at the time, would later prove to be a critical misstep, effectively contaminating what might have been a vital crime scene and eliminating a significant source of forensic evidence. But the truck did provide Paul's family with a place to start searching for the missing man. Pete, Paul's brother, and his wife spent an entire day diligently scouring the desert near where the truck had been found, hoping against hope to discover Paul, perhaps disoriented or injured. See if Paul was out there wandering around. I just remember combing the desert for hours, looking for any sign of him, any evidence, hoping for something that would lead us in a direction to find him. The raw hope, tinged with growing despair, was palpable in their efforts. Karen and her daughters also joined the frantic efforts, distributing flyers, talking to residents in nearby areas. They made flyers and stuff and put it up, and we were trying to work together. We walked forever, walking to see, and if we can see them somewhere, passing out flyers at the houses. But after nearly 24 hours of exhaustive, emotionally draining searching, Paul remained elusive. They were running into a dead end. The desert, in its vast indifference, seemed to swallow their hopes whole. The desert, however, was not yet finished revealing its secrets. The search for answers would soon lead investigators to another remote patch of arid land, this time to a different, far more gruesome, sort of dead end. The quiet hope of finding a lost man would be shattered by the grim reality of a murdered one. It was the morning of October 25th, the day after Karen reported Paul missing, when a group of ATV riders ventured into the rugged terrain of the White Tank Mountains. This sprawling 30,000-acre park, located approximately 30 minutes north of Avondale and nearly an hour west of where Paul's truck had been found, was a popular recreational area. The landscape was a harsh beauty. This really rocky desert was cactus. And you've got to be careful when you go in there, a local described it, emphasizing the challenging nature of the terrain. But on this particular morning, one rider encountered an obstacle far more disturbing than a rocky outcrop or a thorny cactus. He didn't realize it until he rolled over it that there was a body there. The discovery was horrifying. A male body mutilated, bearing the marks of extreme violence. They discovered a male that had been mutilated, shot, beat up, possibly stabbed. It appears that he has been murdered. The initial assessment was stark. leaving no room for doubt about the criminal nature of the death. The ATV riders, shaken to their core, immediately called the authorities. Their recreational outing transformed into a grisly encounter with death. By the time the Buckeye police arrived, the crime scene offered little in the way of pristine evidence. The very nature of the discovery, in a heavily trafficked recreational area, meant that potential physical evidence had been largely compromised. Detective Dave Owens, he had been out of the scene, and he came back and I said, "What have we got out there?" And he said, "I've got a mess." Owens's weary, grim reply spoke volumes about the challenges inherent in the scene. There were ATV tracks, there were footprints. This was a heavily used recreational area, and any physical evidence that was left around the body had been largely destroyed. The unfortunate reality of public access meant that the initial purity of the scene, crucial for forensic analysis, was irrevocably tainted. Adding to the investigative hurdles, there was no wallet and no ID. He was just a John Doe. The victim, stripped of his identity, became a chilling enigma. Another piece of the puzzle that refused to fit neatly. So it really boils down to having to go to the medical examiner's office, collect the fingerprints, and try to run through a system, and that's going to take time. This painstaking process, a cornerstone of forensic identification, became the immediate priority. And in addition to the fingerprints, the autopsy revealed just how their John Doe had died, a testament to unimaginable brutality. There were 61 separate blows to the head, blunt force trauma, which fractured his skull. The sheer number of blows suggested an intense, personal rage, far beyond what might be necessary to simply end a life. From a criminal psychology perspective, overkill often points to an emotional, even frenzied, state of mind, a desire to obliterate, not just kill. However, those horrific injuries were only the beginning. They found stab wounds, they found 3 separate gunshot wounds, one to his back. The combination of blunt force trauma, stab wounds, and gunshots, particularly a shot to the back, spoke to a prolonged, torturous assault, a truly sadistic act, which told the investigators at least one thing about the victim and his killer. Somebody really hated that guy. This conclusion, drawn from the raw brutality of the crime, was an emotional and psychological one, indicating a deep-seated animosity or rage directed at the victim. The question, now rendered infinitely more urgent, echoed through the sterile corridors of the police station. Who was he, though? The dead man's fingerprints weren't in the system, meaning he wasn't previously known to law enforcement. But the killer had, inadvertently, left behind a potentially important clue, a subtle detail that would prove invaluable. The only thing that could possibly identify him is his wedding ring that he was wearing, which had 3 diamonds that were in a diagonal pattern. This distinctive piece of jewelry, a symbol of commitment, became the key to unlocking the victim's identity. In hopes of finding someone who could identify the man's distinctive ring, the investigators searched the database of recent missing persons reports. That's where you're going to be able to possibly pull something up, they reasoned. Following standard investigative protocol, the methodical cross-referencing of unique descriptors, no matter how small, is often the pivot point in complex cases. And they soon came across a potential match. The body seems to line up with a missing person that had gone missing a few days prior named Paul Thompson. The grim pieces of the puzzle were starting to align, pointing irrevocably towards the missing husband from Avondale. By that evening, the Buckeye detective, carrying the weight of this grim suspicion, was knocking on Karen's door. They were very anxious to talk to the person who reported him missing, now with a far more concrete and horrifying reason. Karen appeared more than willing to talk to him too. Karen seemed very forthright about her husband's disappearance. Her demeanor, at this stage, remained outwardly composed, even cooperative. She told police that she felt that something went wrong, that something is wrong with her husband, that this was not like him, that he was in danger. The police suspected she was right,